The invitation arrived at 11 minutes past midnight, which was either a coincidence or Dorian's idea of a joke. Alaric Voss held the envelope between two fingers like it might detonate. Cream-colored, heavy cardstock. Gold leaf pressed into the edges, with the kind of care that costs more than most people earn in a year. He could smell the ink before he opened it. Iron gall and oak tannin, the old recipe, which meant Dorian had gone to the monastery scribes in Vienna for this, the ones who still mixed their ink by hand and charged a fortune for the privilege of pretending the modern world did not exist. Alaric understood the appeal. He opened it with his thumbnail. A single clean cut along the top seam. The card inside was simple. Date, location, time. A cathedral in northern Scotland that the Voss family had owned since before Scotland had a name. And at the bottom, in Dorian's loose, sprawling handwriting that had not changed in 800 years, a note. Bring someone. I am serious. Rick. Do not show up alone and stand by the blood fountain looking like a portrait of yourself. I will seat you next to Aunt Mathilde, and you know what she is like after her third glass. Alaric set the card on the desk. He sat in the chair he had sat in for the last 4 centuries. A leather wingback, cracked in all the places his body had taught it to crack. The study around him was dark, vast, and silent. Bookshelves climbed 30 feet to a ceiling that had not seen daylight since the year Napoleon lost his nerve at Waterloo. There were no windows. Alaric had bricked them up himself, one by one, over the span of a particularly unpleasant decade. He read the invitation again. Dorian was getting married. Dorian, his younger brother by 200 years, who still laughed at things, who still found the world interesting, who had once spent an entire century learning to paint because a woman in Florence told him his hands looked artistic. Dorian, who felt things the way mortals did, wide and fast, and without the filter of millennia weighing every emotion down until it arrived muted, late, and barely worth acknowledging. Dorian was marrying a half-fae. Alaric let that thought sit in his chest, the way one lets a sip of something too hot sit on the tongue, not swallowing, not spitting, just holding it, testing the burn. A half-fae, in a vampire royal house. The old families would lose their minds. The Ashworth line alone would probably declare it an act of war, and the Ashworths had not declared anything in 3 centuries, because they were lazy, petty creatures who preferred to let their displeasure curdle slowly, like milk left on a counter. But this would wake them. This would wake all of them. And Dorian knew it. That was the thing about his brother. People mistook the laughter and the painting and the century-long hobbies for softness. They were wrong. Dorian was a Voss. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was doing it anyway, which was either courage or recklessness, and Alaric had lived long enough to know those were the same thing in different lighting. The door to the study opened without a knock, which meant it was Lena. Lena Hargrove had been Alaric's steward for 812 years. She was compact, precise, and humorless in the way that a scalpel is humorless. Not because she lacked the capacity for joy, but because joy was inefficient, and she did not tolerate inefficiency. She wore her dark hair pulled back so tightly, it looked like it had been punished. Her suits were always gray. Her shoes never made a sound on the stone floors, a trick that had taken her 3 centuries to perfect, and that she considered her finest accomplishment. "You have seen it," she said. "Not a question." "I have. The court is already aware. Word travels. Word always travels. That is the problem with word." Lena closed the door behind her and stood with her hands clasped at her waist. She had a way of standing that made the air around her feel organized. The old houses will interpret this as a provocation. The old houses interpret breakfast as a provocation. Lord Ashworth has already sent a letter. Burn it. I did. He sent another. Burn that one too. I burned 3. He has switched to electronic correspondence. It is harder to burn an email, sir. Alaric almost smiled. Almost. The muscle twitched, and then thought better of it, which was the closest his face had come to expressing amusement in roughly 60 years. "There is also the matter of the note," Lena said. "Dorian's request that you bring a companion. I saw. The court is speculating. Let them. They are assembling lists." This caught his attention. Lists of eligible partners. Lady Ashworth's niece, Countess Morell's daughter, the Petrov twins, though I am told they come as a package, and one of them bites. They are vampires, Lena. They all bite. She bites during conversation, unprovoked. It is considered a personality flaw. Alaric looked at the invitation again. The gold leaf caught the lamplight and threw a thin amber line across the desk. He traced it with his gaze and thought about the last time he had brought someone to a gathering. 6 centuries ago, a winter ball in Prague. The woman on his arm had worn a red gown, and she had laughed at everything he said, as if his words were music. And 3 weeks later, she had betrayed him in a way that still left a taste in his mouth, like burnt copper when he thought about it. Which he did not do, because he was 3,000 years old, and he did not dwell on things, except he was dwelling on it right now, which annoyed him. He picked up the invitation, held it over the lamp. The card caught fire from the bottom up, slow and deliberate, the gold leaf popping and crackling as it dissolved. The flame climbed to his fingertips, and he held it there until the last flake of ash drifted to the desk. Inform the court that I will attend alone. Dorian specified that you bring someone. Dorian specifies many things. I comply with few of them. He also specified, in a separate communication to me, that if you refuse, he will seat you between Aunt Mathilde and Lord Gideon Crace, who, as you recall, spent the entirety of the 1847 gathering describing his collection of antique doorknobs. Alaric's jaw tightened. That was the only sign. Every doorknob, Lena added, individually, with provenance. I remember. For 9 hours. I said I remember. Lena let the silence do its work. She was excellent with silences. She could load a silence the way other people loaded weapons. Assemble the list, Alaric said. Already done, sir. She produced a leather folder from somewhere, which was impressive because her suit had no visible pockets, and she had not been carrying anything when she walked in. Alaric had long suspected that Lena could produce objects from pure organizational willpower. The folder contained 12 pages. Names, lineages, political affiliations, personality profiles, photographs that ranged from formal portraits to what appeared to be surveillance captures. He looked at page 1. Lady Vivian Ashworth, 2,200 years old, known for her collection of poisoned brooches and her laugh, which had been described by a court historian as the sound a chandelier makes when it falls. Page 2. Countess Morel's daughter, Isabel, 900, quiet, well-read, had once refused to speak to anyone for an entire decade because someone mispronounced her name at a banquet. Page 3. The Petrov twins. Alaric closed the folder. He placed it flat on the desk, aligned it with the edge, looked at it for 3 seconds, and then looked at Lena. No. Sir. No to all of them. No to the concept of the list. No to the idea that I should select a companion from a catalog like choosing a horse. Horses are quite carefully selected. I am not attending the wedding with a vampire aristocrat who has been groomed for political alliance since before the Renaissance. Every one of these names comes with a faction, a family agenda, and a century of unspoken obligations. I will not walk into Dorian's wedding carrying someone else's war. Lena received this with the same expression she used for everything, which was no expression at all. Then what do you intend to do? Alaric stood. He was tall, in the way that old things are tall. Not just height, but presence. The room changed shape around him when he moved, shadows adjusting, air redistributing, as if the architecture itself recognized who paid the mortgage. I intend, he said, to figure that out. He walked out. Lena watched him go. She looked at the folder. She looked at the pile of ash on the desk that had been the invitation. She looked at the empty chair. Wonderful, she said to no one. She collected the ash with a small brush she kept in her inside pocket, because of course she did, and she disposed of it in a crystal dish she kept on the 3rd shelf specifically for the disposal of things Alaric set on fire, because this was not the first time, and it would not be the last. Then she sat in the other chair, the one guests used, and she allowed herself precisely 4 seconds of something that in another person might have been worry. The Voss family had survived plagues, wars, revolutions, and one particularly embarrassing incident in the 17th century involving a goat and a misunderstanding at the French court. They would survive Dorian's wedding. Probably. The problem with Alaric, and Lena would never say this aloud because she valued her position and also her head, was that he had been alone for too long. Not alone in the way that someone is alone when they skip a party. Alone in the way that a lighthouse is alone, functional, visible, necessary, and surrounded by nothing but water and the occasional bird that does not understand what it has landed on. He ran the court with precision. He managed the old houses with a combination of strategic boredom and the unspoken promise that if they pushed too hard, he would push back. And he had 3,000 years of pushing back stored up and nowhere to spend it. He attended the necessary functions. He signed the necessary documents. He made the necessary threats in the necessary tones of voice. But he had not, as far as Lena could determine, done a single thing for himself since the incident in Prague. She did not think about the incident in Prague because Alaric did not think about the incident in Prague, and Lena's job was to mirror his priorities, not question them. But the invitation had rattled something. She had seen it in the way he held the card, not with indifference, with recognition, as if the card knew something about him that he had been trying to forget. She straightened the folder, returned it to its proper shelf, and left the study. The cathedral was quiet. It was always quiet. Alaric's home was a converted Gothic cathedral in the English countryside, purchased in 1743 and renovated in stages over the following centuries, until it became something that was neither church nor home, but rather the architectural equivalent of Alaric himself, beautiful, cold, and full of rooms that served no purpose except to exist. Lena walked the east corridor, her shoes silent on the stone, past the gallery of portraits that no one looked at, past the music room where no one played, past the library where Alaric spent most of his time not reading but simply existing in the presence of books, as if proximity to human thought might substitute for participation in it. The staff, such as they were, moved in the shadows, vampire attendants who had served the Voss household for centuries. They did not speak, unless spoken to. They did not make eye contact unless invited. They performed their duties with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that their employer could hear their heartbeat from 3 floors away. Except they did not have heartbeats, which made the whole thing slightly less dramatic but no less tense. The head of intelligence, a wiry vampire named Colton Park, who looked perpetually like he had just been told something disappointing, met Lena at the junction of the east and north corridors. He burned it, Colton said. He did. The list too? No, but he rejected it, forcefully. There was a speech. About political entanglements? About horses. Colton processed this. He had a face that processed things visibly, like a computer with a transparent case. You could watch the thoughts move. So he is attending alone. He says he is. Dorian will not accept that. Dorian rarely accepts anything Alaric says. That is the dynamic. They walked together in silence for a moment. There is another issue, Colton said. The half-fey bride. Ilara. The old houses are already mobilizing. Not aggressively. Not yet. But there are conversations happening. The Ashworths, the Morells, the Devereux family. They are framing it as a question of tradition. It is not a question of tradition. No, it is a question of power. If Dorian can marry outside the bloodlines, anyone can. And if anyone can, the old houses lose their monopoly on alliance through marriage, which is the only leverage most of them have left. Lena considered this. The politics of vampire society were, in her experience, identical to the politics of every other society she had observed over 8 centuries, except with better teeth and worse lighting. Alaric's attendance is the statement, she said. If the sovereign attends, it is sanctioned. If it is sanctioned, objection becomes rebellion, and no one wants to rebel against Alaric. Not since the last one tried. We do not discuss that. We certainly do not. They parted at the north stairwell. Colton went down to his offices, a series of rooms in the cathedral's crypt that he had converted into something between a command center and a research library. Lena went up to her quarters on the 3rd floor, where she maintained a small apartment that was ruthlessly organized and contained exactly one personal item, a photograph, very old, of a person she did not discuss. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had work to do. Security arrangements for the wedding, guest list vetting, threat assessments for every attending family, seating charts that were essentially diplomatic treaties in table form, and the question of Alaric's companion, which he had dismissed but which she knew, with the certainty of 8 centuries of service, was not dismissed at all. He would bring someone. He had to. Dorian's wedding was not a family event. It was a political event dressed in flowers and vows. Every seat was a statement. Every empty seat was a louder one. And the seat next to the sovereign of the Voss line could not be empty without sending a message that would echo through the old houses for decades. Alaric knew this. He had set the invitation on fire not because he did not care, but because he cared too much, and fire was his preferred method of dealing with things that made him feel something. Lena began a second list, not the official one, not the catalog of aristocratic options that Alaric had rejected. A different kind of list. She would not show it to him, not yet. She would wait. She would watch, and when he was ready, or more likely when he was desperate, she would be prepared. That was the job. Not to serve, to anticipate. She typed the first name, and then deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Every option carried a cost. Every companion was a message, and the message had to be right, because this wedding was not about Dorian. This wedding was about whether the old world could survive contact with the new one, and Alaric, whether he admitted it or not, was the hinge. 3 floors below, in the converted nave that served as the cathedral's main hall, Alaric stood in the dark and did nothing. This was his preferred activity, standing, in darkness, doing nothing. He had elevated it to an art form over the millennia. Other vampires had hobbies. They collected things, traveled, maintained elaborate social calendars, started feuds that lasted centuries over perceived slights at dinner parties. Alaric stood in rooms and thought. Tonight he was thinking about Dorian, not about the wedding, about the boy Dorian had been, 800 years ago, when their father was still alive, and the world was a smaller, louder, more violent place. Dorian had been afraid of thunderstorms, a vampire, afraid of weather. He would crawl into Alaric's chamber during storms and sit on the floor and not speak, and Alaric would not speak either, and they would exist in silence until the sky calmed down. That was the thing about Dorian. He did not need you to fix things. He just needed you to be in the room. Alaric had not been in the room for a long time. Not since he took the crown. Not since the weight of it settled onto his shoulders like a second skeleton, heavier than the first, made of expectations and obligations, and the constant, grinding awareness that every decision he made affected not just himself, but the entire delicate architecture of vampire society, which was held together by tradition and fear, and the mutual agreement not to acknowledge how fragile the whole thing actually was. He had given Dorian space. That was how he explained it to himself. Space to grow, to explore, to become whatever he wanted to become, without the shadow of the crown falling across his path. But Dorian had not asked for space. Dorian had asked for his brother, and Alaric had given him silence, because silence was easier, and easier was all he had the energy for after Prague. He thought the word and then stopped thinking it, a mental flinch, so practiced it was almost unconscious. Prague, a door he kept locked, a room he did not enter, a name he did not say. He had been someone else before Prague, not warmer exactly, but less bricked up. Fewer walls, more windows. He had allowed people close. He had allowed one person closer than close, and she had used that closeness like a key, unlocking every vulnerability he had spent centuries building defenses against, and then she had walked through those open doors and burned the house down from the inside. He had rebuilt. Of course he had rebuilt. 3,000 years of existence teaches you that everything can be rebuilt. But he had rebuilt without windows, without doors, a fortress where a cathedral had been. And now Dorian was getting married, and the invitation said bring someone, and the word someone sat in Alaric's chest, like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples out in every direction. He did not want to bring someone. He did not want to be the sovereign at his brother's wedding, performing the role, wearing the mask, being the symbol. He wanted to be the brother who sat on the floor during thunderstorms. But that person did not exist anymore. Alaric looked up at the vaulted ceiling of the nave. The stone arches climbed into shadow, crossing and recrossing like the ribs of some enormous sleeping creature. This building had been a place of worship once. People had come here to feel something larger than themselves. Now it was just a house. His house. A place where nothing was worshipped and nothing was felt. and the only sound was the distant hum of Lena's laptop, and Colton's footsteps in the crypt, and the absolute, perfect, suffocating silence of a man who had made himself an island, and was only now realizing that islands do not get invited to weddings. He would go. He would find someone. He would play the part. He just had to figure out who to play it with. And that was the problem, because every name he could think of came with strings, and Alaric Voss had spent 3,000 years cutting strings, and he was very good at it, and very tired of it, and completely unwilling to tie new ones. So he stood in the dark, and he did nothing, and the cathedral did nothing with him. Somewhere in London, 37 miles south and a world away, a woman named Nessa Adjei was chasing a one-eyed cat down a street at 2 in the morning and swearing at it in a combination of English and Twi that would have made her grandmother proud and horrified in equal measure. She did not know that her life was about to change. The cat did not know either, but the cat was focused on a pigeon and did not care about narrative developments. The pigeon was already gone, and the night was just getting started. The cat's name was General Whiskers, which was not the name Nessa had given him. The shelter had named him that, and she had kept it, because changing a rescue animal's name felt like identity theft, and she had enough guilt in her life without adding existential crises on behalf of a cat. General Whiskers had one eye, no tail, and the survival instincts of a lemming with a death wish. He escaped from Nessa's apartment roughly twice a week, through a window that she swore she had sealed shut with duct tape and conviction, and both had failed her. Tonight he had gotten out while she was in the shower. She had emerged in a towel, seen the open window, and said a word her mother would have slapped her for, and then she had thrown on scrubs, the first pair she grabbed, which happened to be the ones with cartoon frogs on them, that she had bought as a joke, and now wore regularly, because laundry was a luxury, and dignity was a concept she had abandoned somewhere around her 3rd year of vet school. She was running. The street was empty. London at 2 a.m. has a specific quality that is hard to describe if you have not experienced it. It is not quiet, because London is never quiet. But the noise changes. The daytime roar of traffic and commerce, and 8 million people all needing something at the same time, gives way to a different sound. Foxes, night buses, the distant hum of a city that is technically asleep but has one eye open, like General Whiskers, watching. Nessa saw the cat. He was sitting in the middle of the road, in the precise center of the lane, grooming himself with the calm self-assurance of a creature that has never once considered the concept of oncoming traffic. "General," she hissed. "Get out of the road." The cat looked at her. His one good eye reflected the streetlight like a tiny gold coin. He did not move. "I will leave you out here. I will. I am not bluffing." She was bluffing. She was always bluffing. She had once driven 45 minutes to rescue a hedgehog that turned out to be a pine cone, and she had brought the pine cone home anyway because she felt bad about getting its hopes up. She stepped into the road. The car came from her left. Black. Long. The kind of car that costs more than the apartment she lived in, which was not saying much because her apartment cost very little, but still. It was moving fast, headlights cutting the dark like surgical lamps, and it was heading directly for the patch of road currently occupied by one woman, in frog scrubs, and one cat, with a death wish. Nessa did the only thing she could think of. She lunged for the cat, scooped him up, and threw herself sideways. The car swerved. There was a sound like the world crumpling a piece of aluminum foil the size of a house. Metal on metal. The black car struck a food truck parked at the curb, a truck that sold Turkish wraps during the day, and was now closed and empty, and had done nothing to deserve the violence being inflicted upon its front end. Nessa hit the pavement. Her elbow took the worst of it. General Whiskers, tucked against her chest, yowled once, and then went limp, which was his version of cooperation, and usually lasted about 4 seconds. She lay on the ground. She stared at the sky. The sky stared back, dark and unhelpful. "Ow," she said. She sat up. The cat was fine. She could tell, because he was already trying to squirm free, his single eye locked onto something in the distance that was probably another pigeon, or possibly a leaf, or potentially nothing at all, because cats are lunatics. The car. She looked at the car. The front end was folded into the food truck like an accordion, Steam or smoke or some kind of expensive-looking vapor was rising from the hood. The headlights were still on, pointing in slightly different directions now, giving the scene the look of a confused robot trying to figure out where it went wrong. Nessa stood up. Her elbow was bleeding. There was hot sauce on her sleeve from the food truck, a red smear that looked dramatic in the streetlight but smelled like garlic and chili, which somewhat undermined the drama. The driver's side door of the car opened. A man got out, not the driver, the passenger side, rear, which meant there was a driver somewhere in there too, but this man emerged from the back seat, like someone stepping out of a coffin, if coffins were made of leather and tinted glass. He was tall, very tall, the kind of tall that makes you recalculate the dimensions of the space around him, as if the street had gotten narrower. His suit was black, his shirt was black, his shoes were black, his hair was dark and pushed back from a face that was so pale it looked like it had been carved from the moon, and then given cheekbones as an afterthought. Nessa stared at him. He stared at the food truck. His expression did not change. If he was alarmed by the accident, or concerned about the driver, or upset about the damage to what was clearly a very expensive vehicle, none of that information reached his face. His face was a locked door with a "Do Not Disturb" sign. Nessa's brain, which had been busy processing the near-death experience, and the bleeding elbow, and the escaped cat, looked at this man, and then took a brief, unauthorized vacation. The man turned to look at her. His eyes were gray, not the soft romantic gray of a cloudy sky, the gray of a lake in winter, the kind you look at and think, that is deep and cold, and there are things at the bottom of it that have been there for a very long time. Nessa's brain returned from vacation and immediately clocked out again. "Your car," she said, because someone had to say something, and he was clearly not going to. "Your car nearly ran me over." He looked at her, then at the cat, then back at her. "You were in the road," he said. His voice was low and even, and had an accent she could not place, something that sounded like it had been to a lot of countries, and kept a little piece of each one, without committing to any of them. "I was rescuing my cat. In the road." "Yes, in the road. Where cars go. Where your car went. Into me. Nearly." He glanced at the crumpled front end of the vehicle. "It appears my driver has struck the food truck." "Your driver nearly struck me, but did not. The intention was there." The rear driver's side door opened, and another figure emerged. A woman in a gray suit, dark hair pulled back so tightly, it looked structural. Lena Hargrove assessed the scene in roughly 2 seconds. Damaged vehicle, damaged food truck, bleeding woman in frog scrubs holding a one-eyed cat. Alaric, standing in the street, looking like a marble column that had wandered away from a museum. "Sir," Lena said. "Handle it," Alaric said. "Handle what, specifically?" "All of it." Lena looked at Nessa. Nessa looked at Lena. There was a moment of mutual recognition, the kind that passes between two women who are both dealing with a situation that a man has just made worse. "Are you injured?" Lena asked. "My elbow is bleeding, and there is hot sauce on me, and my cat is traumatized." General Whiskers chose this moment to purr. He was not traumatized. He had already forgotten the incident, and was now focused on chewing on a button on Nessa's scrubs. Lena produced a card from her jacket. "We will cover all damages, medical expenses, property damage to the food truck, and any veterinary costs for your cat. His name is General Whiskers." For General Whiskers. He does not need a vet. He needs therapy. He keeps escaping and running into traffic, and I think he is doing it on purpose. Lena looked at the cat. The cat looked at Lena. Neither was impressed. Nessa took the card. It was heavy, cream-colored, with a single name, embossed in black. Voss. No first name. With no title, no phone number, just the name, and a small crest that looked like it belonged on a castle gate, or possibly a very pretentious bottle of wine. "Cool," Nessa said. "And who is paying for his therapy?" She pointed at General Whiskers.
"The cat's therapy,"
Lena said. "He has issues. I can see that." Alaric, who had been standing perfectly still during this exchange, watching Nessa with an expression that was trying very hard to remain empty, and not quite succeeding, turned and walked back toward the car. Nessa watched him go. She did not understand why, but watching him walk away felt like watching a door close. Not a door she wanted to go through, just a door she had not known was there. And now that she had seen it, the wall looked different. "Wait," she said. He stopped, did not turn, just stopped. "Your insurance. I need your insurance information. You cannot just hand me a card with one word on it and drive away in your demolished luxury car like that is how accidents work." Alaric turned his head. Just his head. His body remained facing away. The angle should have looked awkward. It looked instead like something out of a painting, the kind of painting where the subject is technically a person, but is really a metaphor for loneliness. "My steward will handle the details." "Your steward. Lena, you have a steward." "Yes. Like a butler. Like a steward. At 2 in the morning, your steward is with you in the car at 2 in the morning." "She is always with me." Lena, to her credit, did not react to this description of her role as always with him, which made her sound like a chronic condition rather than a highly competent professional. "Give me your number," Nessa said. "Not the steward's, yours. You hit a food truck and nearly hit me, and I deserve the basic dignity of having the number of the person whose car did the hitting." Alaric looked at Lena. Lena looked at Alaric. Something passed between them. Not words, not a signal. Just the kind of understanding that develops between two people who have spent 8 centuries in each other's proximity and can communicate entire arguments in a single glance. "I do not have a phone," Alaric said. "You do not have a phone." "No. It is the 21st century. I am aware. Everybody has a phone. I do not. My grandmother has a phone. She is 78, and she uses it to send me pictures of her garden, and also to accidentally video call me at 5 in the morning while she is making porridge. Even she has a phone. Your grandmother sounds resourceful. Do not deflect. Phone number, now." Lena stepped in. She produced a sleek black phone from her jacket, the kind that looked like it was made by a company that does not advertise because its customers already know. She offered it to Nessa, screen displaying a contact card. Nessa took down the number. She looked at the name on the screen. Alaric Voss. "Alaric," she said, testing the word. "Is that a real name?" "It has been my name for a very long time." "That is not what I asked." She tucked General Whiskers tighter against her chest. He had fallen asleep, because cats have no concept of dramatic timing. She looked at the crumpled car, at the food truck, at the scattered debris on the road, at the improbably tall man in the improbably black suit who did not own a phone and had a steward, and looked at her like she was a puzzle he had not expected to encounter on a Tuesday night. "I am going home," she said. "I am going to put my cat in his bed, which he will ignore because he sleeps in my sink. I am going to put a plaster on my elbow, and then I am going to call that number, and you are going to answer, or have your steward answer, or send a carrier pigeon, or whatever it is you do, and we are going to sort out the insurance. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Alaric said. The word sounded strange in his mouth, like he had learned it from a book and was testing it in the wild for the first time. Nessa turned and walked away. Her scrubs had hot sauce and road grit and a small bloodstain from her elbow, and she was carrying a sleeping, one-eyed cat, and she was wearing shoes she had grabbed without looking, which meant one sneaker and one sandal, and none of this appeared to bother her at all. Alaric watched her go. Lena watched Alaric watch her go. "Sir," Lena said, after 30 seconds of this. "What?" "The car. What about it?" "It is destroyed." Alaric looked at the car, as if seeing it for the first time. The front end was still folded into the food truck. The driver, a vampire named Philip who had served the household for 3 centuries and had never been in an accident, because vampire reflexes are excellent, and also because Alaric typically traveled on roads that did not contain women chasing cats, was standing beside the wreckage looking mortified. "Call another one," Alaric said. "Another car." "Yes. For the 3-block drive back to where we are staying. I am not walking." "You have walked across continents." "I have. I did not enjoy it." "Call the car." Lena called the car. They stood on the empty street, waiting. The food truck leaked something that smelled like tahini. A fox trotted past on the opposite pavement, glanced at them with the disinterest of a creature that has seen everything London has to offer and is no longer impressed. Alaric said nothing. He stood with his hands in his pockets, which he never did, and he looked in the direction Nessa had walked. which was west, toward a part of London where the buildings got smaller and the rents got cheaper, and a woman in frog scrubs could disappear into the ordinary darkness of an ordinary life. Lena watched him. She had seen Alaric in negotiations that would decide the fate of nations. She had seen him face threats that would have reduced lesser vampires to ash. She had seen him stand unmoved before rage, before grief, before the slow erosion of centuries. She had never seen him put his hands in his pockets. The second car arrived. They got in. The leather interior smelled like nothing, which was how Alaric preferred his environments. Clean, controlled, absent of anything that might trigger a memory, or an association, or a feeling that he had not pre-approved. He sat in silence for the entire ride. Lena sat across from him, pretending to check her phone, actually watching his face, reading the micro-expressions that no one else alive could see, because no one else alive had spent 8 centuries learning his tells. His jaw was relaxed. That was wrong. Alaric's jaw was never relaxed. It was always set, always clenched, always held in the position of a man bracing for impact from a blow that might come from any direction. But right now, sitting in the back of the car, 3 blocks from the woman in the frog scrubs, his jaw was relaxed, and his hands were in his pockets, and there was something happening behind his eyes that Lena had not seen in 600 years. She was not sure whether to be relieved or terrified. She decided on both. The car pulled through the gates of the London residence, a Georgian townhouse in Mayfair that the Voss family maintained for visits to the city. It was large by London standards and modest by Alaric's standards, which meant it only had 14 rooms and 2 staircases and a wine cellar that technically constituted a war crime in terms of what it contained. Alaric went directly to his study. Second floor, corner room, windows bricked up. Of course. He sat in the chair. He looked at the desk. On the desk was a second copy of the invitation, because Lena always made copies, and he had only burned one. Bring someone. He heard Nessa's voice in his head, sharp, unafraid, annoyed in the way that people are annoyed when they have a genuine grievance, and no patience for people who think money makes grievances disappear. He heard her say, "Your car nearly ran me over," and he heard the way she had poked him in the chest, actually poked him, one finger, hard, into the sternum, a gesture so aggressive and so familiar and so absurdly brave that he had nearly flinched, and Alaric Voss did not flinch, had not flinched since the fall of Constantinople, and even that was debatable. He sat in the chair, and he looked at the invitation, and he did not think about Prague. He thought about frog scrubs, and hot sauce, and a one-eyed cat named General Whiskers. And the rusted gear in his chest turned one more notch, and he felt it this time. Felt it the way you feel a crack in ice that you are standing on, not the fall, just the warning that the fall is coming. He was very good at ignoring things. But some things do not care whether they are ignored. In a studio apartment above a laundromat on the other side of London, Nessa set General Whiskers on the kitchen counter. He immediately jumped into the sink and curled up, because the sink was cold, and he was contrarian, and cold sinks were his preferred sleeping location, for reasons that veterinary science could not explain, and Nessa had stopped trying. She put a plaster on her elbow. She washed the hot sauce off her sleeve. She stood in her tiny kitchen, in her frog scrubs and one sneaker and one sandal, and she looked at the card. Voss. She turned it over. Nothing on the back. Just the crest. She set it on the counter next to the toaster, which was broken, and the pile of mail she had not opened, and the dead succulent that she still watered every morning, because giving up on a living thing felt wrong, even when the living thing had clearly given up on itself. She looked at General Whiskers, asleep in the sink. "What a weird night," she said. The cat did not respond. She went to bed. She did not call the number. She did not think about the tall man with the gray eyes, and the voice like a locked room. She thought about her shift tomorrow. She thought about the rent, which was due, and the student loans, which were eternal, and the noise the laundromat made at 6 in the morning, when the first customers came in, and the machines started their daily percussion concert directly below her bedroom floor. She fell asleep. She dreamed about nothing. 3 miles away, Alaric Voss sat in a chair in the dark and did not sleep, because vampires do not sleep, and he did not dream, because dreaming requires the willingness to let the mind go where it wants, and Alaric had not let his mind go anywhere unsupervised in a very long time. But if he had dreamed, and he would never admit this, not to Lena, not to Dorian, not to the empty room, or the bricked-up windows, or the 3,000 years of solitude that sat on his shoulders like a coat he had forgotten how to take off. If he had dreamed, it would have been about a woman who poked him in the chest and demanded things and was not afraid. He did not dream, but the gear turned. Alaric did not visit Nessa the next day, or the day after, or the day after that. He sent Lena. Lena arrived at the veterinary clinic where Nessa worked at precisely 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, because Lena believed that 9 a.m. was the hour at which all reasonable business should be conducted, and deviation from this was a character flaw. The clinic was in Camberwell, South London, wedged between a kebab shop and a charity store that exclusively sold things no one wanted, and somehow stayed open, through what Lena could only assume was dark magic or a tax scheme. The clinic was called Paws and Claws, which Lena found aggressively cheerful, for a place where animals went when they were sick or broken. The sign out front featured a cartoon dog waving, which raised anatomical questions that Lena chose not to pursue. She walked in. The reception area was small, clean, and smelled like antiseptic and dog biscuits. A teenager behind the desk was eating a sandwich and reading something on their phone that was clearly not work-related. "I am here to see Nessa Ajay," Lena said. The teenager looked up, looked at Lena's gray suit, looked at her shoes, looked at her expression, which was the expression of someone who had never eaten a sandwich while reading her phone, because she had never allowed herself such an indulgence, and viewed those who did with a mixture of confusion and envy. "She is in surgery. Can I take a message?" "I will wait." Lena sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall. The chair was orange. It was the most aggressive color Lena had voluntarily sat in since 1974. She crossed her ankles, straightened her jacket, and waited. 40 minutes later, Nessa emerged from the back. She was wearing different scrubs today. These had small hedgehogs on them. There was something on her left sleeve that might have been antiseptic or might have been saliva. She looked tired in the way that people look tired when they have been tired for so long, that tired has become a personality trait, rather than a temporary state. She saw Lena and stopped. "You?" she said. "Good morning, Miss Ajay." "The steward." "I prefer Lena. You are the steward of the man whose car hit a food truck while nearly hitting me." "That is a concise summary, yes." Nessa leaned against the reception counter. The teenager with the sandwich had vanished, either through a door or through the sheer force of Lena's presence, which had a way of making non-essential personnel relocate. "Is this about the insurance?" "In part. I am also here to assess the damages." "The damages to me or the damages to the food truck?" "Both, though primarily to you." "I am fine. My elbow has a plaster on it, and my cat is sleeping in my sink, and the food truck owner has already called me, because apparently somebody gave him my number, which was a choice. That was me. He needed a witness statement." "He needed a witness statement at 6 in the morning?" "He is Turkish. They start early." Nessa looked at Lena for a long moment. Lena looked back. There was a quality to Lena that made you feel like you were being scanned, like she was cataloging you into a system that only she could access, and that filed people under categories like useful, irrelevant, and threat. "What do you actually want?" Nessa said. "I want to resolve the matter to your satisfaction so that it does not become a legal issue." "It is not going to become a legal issue. I do not have a lawyer. I cannot afford a lawyer. I can barely afford the plaster." "We would like to compensate you for any inconvenience." "Inconvenience? Your boss's car nearly ended my life, and you are calling it an inconvenience. My employer regrets the incident." "Does he?" "Because he did not seem to regret anything. He seemed like the kind of person who has never regretted anything in his life, because that would require admitting he is capable of error." Lena's mouth twitched. It was the smallest possible movement, a micro-expression that lasted less than 1/10 of a second, and on any other face it would have been invisible. On Lena's face, which was as carefully controlled as a Swiss watch, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Mr. Voss is not accustomed to interacting directly with the public. Mr. Voss is not accustomed to interacting with humans at all, I suspect." There was a pause. A specific kind of pause. The kind that happens when someone says something accidentally true, and the other person has to decide whether to acknowledge it. Lena did not acknowledge it. I have been authorized to offer you compensation for your time, your injury, and any distress caused to your animal. General Whiskers is fine. He is always fine. He has the emotional resilience of a brick. Nevertheless, Lena placed an envelope on the counter. Nessa looked at it. She did not pick it up. What is in there? A check. For how much? Lena told her. Nessa laughed. It was a real laugh, loud and startled, and completely graceless, the kind of laugh that happens when something is so absurd that the body responds before the mind can intervene. That is more than I make in a year. It is intended to cover all potential damages. I scraped my elbow. I did not lose a limb. Mr. Voss prefers to be thorough. Mr. Voss prefers to throw money at problems until they stop being problems. I have met people like that. Usually they are the problem. Lena received this observation with the stoic grace of someone who had heard variations of it before and agreed with all of them, but would never say so, because loyalty was not conditional on agreement. Nessa pushed the envelope back across the counter. I do not want his money. Tell him to pay for the food truck. The owner. His name is Hassan. He is a good man. He makes excellent wraps, and his livelihood is currently crumpled into the front end of a car that costs more than his annual revenue. Pay for that. Pay for his lost business while the truck is being repaired. That is what matters. Lena picked up the envelope. She studied Nessa with an expression that was not quite surprise, because Lena did not do surprise, but was in the neighborhood of surprise, perhaps on the same street, walking toward it but not yet arrived. I will relay your request. It is not a request. It is what is right. Lena nodded. She stood. She straightened her jacket, which did not need straightening, but which she straightened anyway, because ritual comforted her. Miss Ajay, may I ask a personal question? You may ask, I may not answer. How long have you been a veterinary technician? 4 years. Why? Curiosity. Thank you for your time. Lena left. She walked out of the clinic, past the kebab shop, past the charity store, and into the black car that was waiting at the curb, with its engine running and its windows tinted to the point of illegality. She sat in the back. She opened her phone. She texted Colton. Run a background check on Nessa Ajay. Everything. Address, employment history, education, family, finances, social connections. I want to know what she has for breakfast. Colton replied in 11 seconds. How deep? Deep enough to know if she waters her plants. 3 hours later, Lena had the file. Nessa Ajay, 28 years old, born in Lewisham, South London. Mother originally from Ghana, father from Brixton. Grew up in a council flat that she had left at 18 to attend veterinary college, on a scholarship that covered tuition, but not living expenses, which meant she had worked 3 jobs simultaneously for 4 years, and graduated with honors and permanent dark circles under her eyes. She had been a licensed veterinary technician for 4 years. She worked at Paws and Claws 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts, including overnights. Her salary was modest. Her student loans were not. She lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat in Peckham, a neighborhood that estate agents described as up and coming, and residents described with words that were less optimistic and more profane. She had 3 rescue animals: General Whiskers, the one-eyed cat, a 3-legged dog named Biscuit, who had been found tied to a railing outside a supermarket and whom no one had claimed, and a blind hamster named Professor Tiny, who lived in an elaborate cage that Nessa had built from cardboard and tape, and what appeared to be, based on the photographs Colton's team had obtained, the internal structure of a shoebox. She had a dead succulent on her kitchen counter. She watered it every morning. Colton's team had included this detail in the file, with a note that read, "Plant has been dead for approximately 7 months. Subject continues daily watering." Possible sentimentality, possible stubbornness, possibly both. Lena read the file twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, focusing on the parts that were not about employment or finances. Nessa Ajay had no criminal record, no political affiliations, no supernatural connections of any kind. She did not attend any social events that could be considered unusual. She did not frequent any establishments that catered to the non-human community. She did not have any friends, acquaintances, or associates who were vampires, fae, or otherwise. She was, by every measurable standard, completely and unremarkably human. Lena closed the file and looked out the window of the car. London moved past in its usual blur of gray and glass and ambition. She thought about the way Nessa had pushed the check across the counter, not with anger, not with pride, with certainty. The certainty of someone who knows what is right and does not need to debate it, or weigh it, or calculate its strategic implications. Lena had not seen that kind of certainty in a very long time. Vampire society operated on calculation. Every gesture was a move, every word was a position, every act of generosity was an investment, and every act of cruelty was a reminder. Nothing was done because it was right. Things were done because they were advantageous, or because failing to do them was disadvantageous, and the distinction between the two was the engine that powered every interaction, from the lowest court attendant to the sovereign himself. Nessa Adjei did not calculate, she just acted, and her actions lined up with her words, and her words lined up with her beliefs, and the whole system functioned without a single committee meeting or strategic review. It was either admirable or naive, and Lena suspected it was both, in the same way that sunlight is both beautiful and blinding. She brought the file to Alaric that evening. He was in his study, of course. The London study was smaller than the cathedral study but arranged identically, because Alaric did not adapt to spaces. Spaces adapted to him. Same chair, same desk, same lamp, same darkness pressing against the bricked-up windows like a loyal pet waiting to be let in. Lena set the file on the desk. The woman from the accident. The one who poked you. Alaric did not react to this description, which was itself a reaction. He looked at the file. I did not ask for a file on her. You did not need to ask. Lena. Sir. I did not ask. You looked. The silence that followed was a specific kind. The kind that happens when someone is caught and knows they are caught, and the person who caught them is too professional to gloat, but is also definitely gloating internally. Alaric opened the file. He read it in the way he read everything, completely, methodically, without expression. Pages turned at precise intervals. His eyes moved across the text with the efficiency of someone who has been reading for 3,000 years and has eliminated all unnecessary eye movement. He reached the part about the dead succulent. He stopped. He read it again. She waters a dead plant. Every morning. For 7 months. Why? Colton's team speculated sentimentality, or stubbornness. I believe it is guilt. Guilt over a plant. Over giving up. She does not give up on things, even things that have clearly given up on themselves. Alaric looked at the file for a long time. Lena could not read his expression, which was unusual. She could usually read his expressions the way a sailor reads the sky, not by what was visible, but by what was forming behind what was visible, the weather coming before it arrived. But right now his face was a closed book, in a language she did not recognize. She refused the check, he said. She did. She instructed me to compensate the food truck owner instead. The food truck owner. A man named Hassan. She was concerned about his livelihood. She was concerned about the livelihood of a stranger. A stranger whose food truck was struck by your car, yes. Alaric closed the file. He aligned it with the edge of the desk, because Alaric aligned everything with the edge of the desk, because order was the only thing he had complete control over, and he exercised that control relentlessly. She has no supernatural lineage. None. No hidden connections. None. No political value. Absolutely none. She is a veterinary technician who lives above a laundromat and owns a one-eyed cat and waters a dead plant. That is accurate. Alaric sat back in his chair. The leather creaked. It was the only sound in the room. Tell me about the raven, he said. Lena blinked. This was significant. Lena did not blink involuntarily. Every blink was scheduled, budgeted, and approved. Which raven, sir? Edgar. You're familiar. Is he injured? He is a supernatural entity, bound to your essence. He cannot be injured by conventional means. Prepare him to look injured. Sir? I want to bring him to the clinic. I need a reason to visit. Lena processed this request. She processed it carefully, the way one processes a piece of information that is either the beginning of something wonderful or the beginning of something catastrophic, and the difference between the two will only become apparent later, possibly much later, possibly at the worst possible moment. You want to take your immortal raven to a mortal veterinary clinic and pretend it is hurt. Yes. For the purpose of seeing the woman who poked you. For the purpose of ensuring she is recovering from her injuries. Her scraped elbow. Injuries are injuries. She put a plaster on it. I am being thorough. Lena stood very still for approximately 4 seconds. This was her version of screaming. I will prepare Edgar. Thank you. Sir. What? The wedding is in 6 weeks. I am aware. The companion question remains unresolved. I am aware of that as well. Would you like me to prepare a revised list? No. A shorter list. No. A list of 1. Alaric looked at her. Lena looked back. The air between them was so dense with unspoken meaning that it could have been measured with instruments. Prepare the raven, he said. Lena left. She walked down the corridor of the London residence, past the paintings, and the silence, and the ancient furniture that existed in a state of permanent readiness for guests who never came. She found Colton in the kitchen, which was a room that had never been used for its intended purpose because vampires do not eat, and the only appliance that functioned was the coffee machine, which Lena maintained for her own use, because 800 years without sleep did not mean 800 years without caffeine. He wants to bring Edgar to the vet clinic, Lena said. Colton looked up from his laptop. Edgar, his familiar, the immortal raven. Correct. To a mortal vet clinic. Correct. To see the woman. He says he is checking on her elbow. Her elbow. It had a plaster on it. Colton closed his laptop. He leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling. How long has it been since he showed interest in anything that was not a document, a threat, or a piece of furniture? 614 years. And now he is interested in a woman who lives above a laundromat. And her dead succulent, apparently. Colton considered this. This is either the best thing that has happened to this household since the invention of electricity, or the worst thing since Prague. We do not discuss Prague. We are going to have to start discussing Prague if he keeps going to vet clinics at midnight. 3 in the morning. He plans to go at 3 in the morning, because that is when she works the night shift. Of course it is! They looked at each other. 2 people who had spent centuries managing a man who managed an entire civilization, and who were now watching that man prepare an immortal bird to fake an injury so he could visit a woman in frog scrubs. Prepare the raven, Lena said. How do you make an immortal raven look injured? Creatively. Colton opened his laptop again. He searched. Common raven injuries. He looked at the results. He looked at Lena. This is going to be interesting, he said. This is going to be catastrophic, Lena said. She poured herself a coffee. Black, no sugar. The way she had drunk it for 8 centuries. But at least it will not be boring. She was right about that. She was wrong about the catastrophic part. It was going to be both. Edgar, to his credit, committed to the role. He was a large raven, larger than any natural raven had a right to be, with feathers so black they seemed to absorb the light around them like tiny, individual holes in the visible spectrum. He had been Alaric's familiar for over 2,000 years, which in familiar terms was the equivalent of a very long marriage, complete with silent resentments, unspoken affection, and the occasional argument, conducted entirely through eye contact. Colton had spent 3 hours coaching Edgar on how to look injured. They had settled on a drooping wing, which Edgar accomplished by tucking his left wing at an angle that suggested damage without actually involving any damage. He held it there with the dedication of a method actor, occasionally adding a small tremble for effect that Colton had not requested, but that Edgar felt elevated the performance. At 2:47 a.m., Alaric walked into the Paws and Claws veterinary clinic, carrying a raven on his arm. The clinic at night was different. The cheerful reception area was dimly lit. The cartoon dog on the sign outside was unilluminated and therefore mildly sinister. And the only person on duty was Nessa, who was in the back cleaning a surgical table and listening to a podcast about unsolved disappearances, which she found soothing in a way she had never examined closely, and probably should not. The bell above the door chimed. She did not look up. "We are closed for walk-ins. Emergency line is on the door." "I have an emergency." She knew the voice before she looked. Low, unplaceable, belonging to someone who had been to every country and remembered all of them. She looked up. Alaric Voss stood in the reception area of her veterinary clinic at nearly 3 in the morning, wearing a black coat over a black shirt, over what she assumed were black trousers, because the man clearly owned no other color, holding a raven the size of a small dog on his forearm. The raven looked at her. It had eyes like polished obsidian, and it was holding one wing at an angle that looked uncomfortable but not, if Nessa was being honest, particularly convincing.
"That is a raven," she said.
"Yes. You brought a raven to a vet clinic. He is injured." Nessa set down the cleaning spray and the cloth. She walked into the reception area. She looked at the raven. The raven looked at her. It tilted its head in that way birds do, as if the world makes more sense from a different angle. What happened to him? He flew into a window. "Your window?" "A window, yes. You have windows?" This was a strange question, and Alaric knew it was a strange question, but he also did not have a good answer, because his actual windows were bricked up, and the lie was falling apart faster than expected. It was a glass door. "Right. And what is his name?" "Edgar." "Of course it is." Nessa extended her hand toward the raven. Edgar, who had been performing his injury with theatrical commitment, looked at her hand, looked at Alaric, and then gently stepped onto her wrist, with the delicate precision of a creature that weighed almost nothing and knew it. She carried him to the examination table. Edgar sat there with perfect stillness, his allegedly injured wing drooping at exactly the same angle, his healthy eye fixed on Nessa with what she could only describe as intense professional interest. She began the examination. She felt along the wing. She checked the joints. She looked at the feathers, which were in better condition than any wild raven's feathers had a right to be. They were glossy, uniform, and soft. "This bird is not injured," she said. The burrito was cold. "He is holding his wing at an angle. He is holding his wing at an angle because he wants to. I have been a vet tech for 4 years, and I can tell the difference between a bird with a damaged wing and a bird that is pretending. This bird is pretending." Edgar, hearing this assessment, added the small tremble. "Method acting." "He is trembling," Alaric pointed out. "He is performing. This is the healthiest raven I have ever examined. His feathers are immaculate. His weight is perfect. His eyes are clear. He does not have a single parasite, which is basically impossible for a wild raven. He is not wild, clearly." Nessa looked at Edgar. Edgar looked at Nessa. A moment passed between them. The kind of moment that happens when two beings recognize each other across a gap that should be too wide to cross. Human and bird. Mortal and familiar. And yet, "He is beautiful," she said, and her voice changed when she said it. The professional assessment dropped away, and something else surfaced, something warm and unguarded. The voice of a person who has spent her entire life in the presence of animals and still, after all this time, finds them miraculous. Edgar ruffled his feathers. If a bird could preen at a compliment, he was preening. Alaric watched Nessa's face. He watched the way her expression shifted when she spoke to the bird, the way her hands moved with absolute confidence and absolute tenderness simultaneously, the way she treated Edgar, not as a specimen or a curiosity, but as a creature, deserving of her full attention and respect. He had seen this before, 3 nights ago, through the window of his car, watching her chase a one-eyed cat down a street at 2 in the morning. The willingness to care about something small. He had forgotten what that looked like. "Why are you really here?" Nessa said, not looking at him. She was scratching Edgar's chest, which Edgar was enjoying immensely, and which he would later deny enjoying, because familiars have reputations to maintain. "I wanted to ensure you were recovering." "From my scraped elbow." "Yes." "You brought a fake injured raven to my clinic at 3 in the morning to check on my scraped elbow. When you say it like that, it sounds unreasonable." "It is unreasonable. I acknowledge that." Nessa looked at him. She leaned against the examination table. one hand still resting on Edgar's back, and she looked at Alaric Voss with the particular expression of a woman who is trying to decide if the person in front of her is dangerous, insane, or merely very bad at social interaction. "Your steward came by," she said, "with a check." "I know. I did not take it." "I know. I told her to pay for the food truck." She relayed that. "It has been done. The truck is being repaired, and the owner has been compensated for his lost business." "Good. You did not have to do that." "Do what?" "Think of him." Nessa frowned. It was a particular kind of frown, the kind that happens when someone says something that reveals more about themselves than about you, and you are not sure what to do with the information. "Why would I not think of him? His truck got smashed. Most people, in your position, would have taken the check. Most people are not me. I am beginning to understand that." Edgar chose this moment to hop off the examination table, glide across the room, and land on a shelf full of pet shampoo bottles. He arranged himself between a bottle of oatmeal conditioner and a flea treatment spray, and settled in as if he had found his natural habitat. "Your bird is nesting in my product display," Nessa said. "He does that. He has a fondness for shelves. Is he going to knock things over?" "Almost certainly." On cue, Edgar nudged a bottle of eardrops off the shelf. It hit the floor with a plastic clatter. He looked at it. He looked at Nessa. He showed no remorse. "He is an agent of chaos," Nessa said. "He is a raven. They are genetically predisposed to mischief. Are you going to pick that up?" "I have not picked anything up off a floor in approximately 2 centuries. That is the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever said to me, and I once had a man tell me his goldfish was depressed because it did not like its tank decor. Was the goldfish depressed? The goldfish do not experience depression. They experience water." Alaric almost smiled again. The muscle twitched. This time it got further than last time. It almost reached his eyes before retreating. Nessa picked up the eardrops. She replaced them on the shelf. She looked at Edgar, who was already nudging a second bottle. "Stop that," she said to the bird. Edgar stopped, immediately, without hesitation. Nessa stared at him. "He listened to me. He does not listen to me. Ever? He has not listened to me since the 14th century." It was a strange thing to say. Nessa registered it as strange. She filed it in the part of her brain that was collecting strange things about Alaric Voss, a file that was growing rapidly, and that she did not know what to do with. "You should go," she said. "The clinic opens at 7, and I have to finish cleaning, and then do the morning intake paperwork, and then pretend I have slept, which I have not, because a man with a fake injured raven showed up at 3 in the morning. I apologize for the intrusion." "You do not apologize. You say the word apology, but your face does not do anything." "My face does not do many things." "I have noticed." She held out her arm. Edgar looked at it, looked at Alaric, made a decision. He flew to Nessa's shoulder instead of Alaric's arm, which was a betrayal so specific and so public that Alaric felt it in his chest like a small, feathered knife. "Edgar," he said. The raven did not move. "He likes me better," Nessa said. "He has known you for 15 minutes. Sometimes 15 minutes is enough." She held still, while Edgar settled on her shoulder, his talons gripping the fabric of her scrubs with exaggerated care, as if he understood that she was fragile in a way that he was not. He pressed his beak against her ear, not biting, just resting, the raven equivalent of a whisper. Nessa laughed, a real one, small, surprised, warm. Alaric watched. The gear turned. This time it did not just turn. It engaged. Something connected to something else, a mechanism that had been dormant so long that the movement felt almost painful, the way a limb that has been still too long hurts when the blood returns. He did not name the feeling. He did not examine it. He let it exist in the space between them, like a sound too low to hear, but too strong to ignore. "Come," he said to Edgar. The raven regarded him with one eye. Then he launched from Nessa's shoulder, crossed the room in a lazy arc, and landed on Alaric's forearm. He tucked his allegedly injured wing against his body, perfectly healthy. The performance abandoned, now that it had served its purpose. "Your raven is a liar," Nessa said. "He learned from the best." Alaric turned toward the door. He paused. "The wedding," he said. Nessa crossed her arms. What wedding? My brother is getting married, in 5 weeks, in Scotland. Good for your brother. I am required to bring a companion. Good luck with that. He looked at her. She looked at him. The clinic hummed with the low sound of the refrigerator and the distant vibration of a washing machine in the laundromat next door, and the specific tension that exists when two people are standing on the edge of something and neither wants to be the first to step. Would you consider accompanying me? Nessa stared at him. Her arms tightened across her chest. Her jaw dropped about half an inch and then recovered, which was her version of shock, calibrated by a lifetime of training herself not to react to things, because reacting was vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury she could not afford. You do not know me. I know you refused a check that would have paid off your student loans, because you were more concerned about a man and his food truck. How do you know about my student loans? He did not answer that. I know your name. I know where you work. I know you live above a laundromat, and you have 3 rescue animals, and you water a dead plant every morning, because you do not give up on things. Nessa went very still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of a person who has just realized that they have been seen, truly seen, by someone who had no reason to look. She focused on the suture needle she had left on the counter. She picked it up, put it in the sterilizer, wiped the counter. That is not charming, she said. That is a restraining order. I understand why it sounds that way. It does not sound that way. It is that way. You have had me investigated. You know things about my life that I have not told you. You show up at my workplace with a fake injured bird. That is not the behavior of a person asking someone on a date. That is the behavior of a person who belongs on a list. She was right. He knew she was right. The realization landed in him like a stone in still water, and the ripples were shame, an emotion so unfamiliar that he had to search his memory to identify it. You are correct, he said. I apologize. And this time, I mean it. Something in his voice changed. Nessa heard it. The careful, controlled, locked-room quality dropped away for half a second, and underneath it was something older and more tired and more honest than anything she had heard from him before. She looked at him. He looked at her. Edgar looked at both of them, and had the good sense to stay quiet. I am going to think about it, Nessa said. The wedding. The whole thing. You. The wedding. The fact that you apparently had me investigated, and somehow think that, is a reasonable foundation for asking someone to a formal event. It is not reasonable. No. I am not accustomed to reasonable. That is obvious. I am accustomed to calculated and strategic and necessary. I am not accustomed to walking into a veterinary clinic and wanting to stay. The words hung in the air. He had not planned to say them. They had arrived without clearance, without strategic review, without the filter of 3,000 years of control. Nessa looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. Something was happening behind her eyes, a process she did not share and he could not read. And for a man who could read the intentions of vampire lords and political enemies and ancient rivals, the inability to read a 28-year-old vet tech from Lewisham was profoundly unsettling. I will think about it, she said again. Now please take your lying raven and leave my clinic before the morning staff arrives, and I have to explain why there is a man in a funeral suit standing in reception with a bird the size of a cat. Alaric left. He walked out into the London night. The air was cool and wet and tasted like diesel and rain. Edgar sat on his shoulder, no longer bothering with the injured wing, radiating a smugness that only an animal that has successfully charmed a woman on behalf of its master can radiate. Alaric stood on the pavement outside the clinic. He looked up at the sign, paws and claws. The cartoon dog waved at him in the darkness. He had asked her. He had done the thing. He had walked into a mortal veterinary clinic at 3 a.m. and asked a woman he barely knew to accompany him to the most politically significant vampire event in a century. And she had said she would think about it, which meant no. He knew it meant no. He had lived long enough to understand the mechanics of human refusal, the polite deferral, the thinking about it, the slow retreat into silence until the question dissolved and was never mentioned again. She would not come. She should not come. It was dangerous and absurd, and the old houses would view it as either an insult or a weakness, and both were correct. He walked to the car, got in, said nothing. Lena was in the back seat, because of course she was. Well, she said she would think about it. That means no. I am aware. They drove back to the Mayfair residence in silence. Edgar rode on the headrest of the passenger seat, cleaning his feathers with the contentment of someone who has had a very good night and is not interested in the emotional turmoil of his companions. At the residence, Alaric went to his study. He sat in the chair. He looked at the invitation. 5 weeks until the wedding. No companion. No plan. Just a dead succulent, a one-eyed cat, and a woman who watered things that had given up. He sat in the dark. He waited. He did not know what he was waiting for. But he waited anyway, because sometimes waiting is the only honest thing a person can do when they have spent 3,000 years being strategic and have run out of strategies and are left with nothing but the terrifying, unfamiliar, entirely unmanageable experience of wanting something without knowing how to get it. Edgar flew to his perch in the corner of the study. The night continued. The gear turned. Nessa did not call him. She did not text him. She did not think about him. This was a lie she told herself for 4 days. She thought about him constantly. She thought about him while she cleaned kennels, and while she administered vaccinations, and while she ate her lunch, which was usually a sandwich she had made at 5 a.m., and which had gotten progressively sadder as the day wore on, the bread going soft, the lettuce wilting, the whole thing, a metaphor for something she did not want to examine. She thought about his face, not in the way she normally thought about faces, which was briefly and then not at all, because Nessa did not dwell on people. Dwelling was a luxury, like spa days and avocado toast and having a savings account. She did not have time to dwell. She had animals to treat, and bills to pay, and a cat to chase, and a dead plant to water. But his face kept surfacing, the gray eyes, the jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone with very strong opinions about geometry, the absolute absence of expression, which should have been off-putting, but was instead fascinating, like a door with no handle. You kept looking for the way in. She told herself it did not matter. She had said she would think about it, and she had thought about it, and the answer was no. Obviously no. She was not going to a wedding in Scotland with a man she had met because his car nearly flattened her. That was not how decisions were made. That was how true crime podcasts began. On the 5th night, at approximately 1 a.m., the clinic's back door shattered inward. Nessa was alone. She was always alone on the overnight shift because the clinic could not afford to staff 2 people at night, and she had volunteered for the solo shifts because they paid slightly more, and slightly more was the difference between making rent and not making rent. She was in the surgical suite, prepping for a morning procedure. She heard the door before she felt it, a sound like a tree falling through a window, and then cold air rushed through the clinic in a wave that smelled wrong, not like London air, like something older, something that had been underground. She did not scream. Nessa had grown up in a neighborhood where screaming was what you did after you had already handled the problem, not before. She stood very still. She listened. Something moved in the back corridor. Fast, too fast. The sound of it was not footsteps. It was more like scraping, nails on linoleum, and with it came a smell that hit her brain before her nose, a smell like copper and rot and the inside of a wound. The animals in the clinic reacted first. The dogs in the overnight kennels started barking, all of them at once, a wall of sound that was not anger but terror. The cats went silent, which was worse. Cats go silent when the predator is something they do not understand. Nessa grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall. It was heavy and red, and shaped like a question, to which there was no good answer, but it was the closest thing to a weapon in the room, and she was not going to stand there empty-handed while something came through her clinic. The thing came around the corner. It had been a person once. Nessa could see that. The shape was human. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a torso. But the proportions were wrong, stretched and angular, as if someone had taken a human body and pulled it like taffy, without fixing the joints. Its skin was gray, not pale, gray, the color of ash, and its eyes were holes. Not empty, just dark. Dark all the way down. It moved in stutters. 3 feet forward, pause, head tilting, sniffing the air, Its mouth was open. The teeth were wrong. Nessa's hands shook. The fire extinguisher trembled. Her brain was doing something she had never experienced before. A full system recalculation. Every assumption about the world she lived in being demolished and rebuilt in real time. And it hurt. It actually hurt. Like a headache made of truth. The creature looked at her. She sprayed it. The fire extinguisher erupted in a cloud of white chemical foam that hit the creature full in the face and chest, and absolutely nothing happened. It blinked. One long, slow blink, like a lizard. The foam dripped off its gray skin. It tilted its head the other way. "Okay," Nessa said. "That was my only plan." The creature lunged. It crossed 10 feet, in a time that should not have been possible, a blur of gray skin and wrong angles, and Nessa swung the fire extinguisher like a cricket bat, and connected with the side of its head, and the impact jarred her arms all the way to her shoulders, and the creature staggered, more surprised than hurt, and she hit it again, and she was screaming now. Not for help, just screaming, the way a person screams when the world has broken its own rules, and the only response available is noise and violence. The creature grabbed the fire extinguisher. It ripped it from her hands with a strength that was casual and immense and deeply unfair. It tossed the extinguisher across the room, where it hit a shelf of medical supplies, and sent bottles and boxes cascading to the floor in a waterfall of organized chaos. Nessa backed up. She hit the wall. The creature advanced. And then Alaric was there. He came through the shattered back door like weather. Not fast, not slow, inevitable. The way a storm arrives. You see it coming, and you cannot stop it, and you do not want to, because storms are honest, in a way that calm skies are not. He caught the creature by the throat, one hand, lifted it off the ground the way a person lifts a jacket off a hook. The creature thrashed, its limbs pinwheeling, its mouth working, those wrong teeth snapping at air. Alaric looked at it. He looked at it the way you look at a piece of mail you did not ask for. Mild annoyance, vague recognition, complete indifference to its continued existence. He squeezed. Nessa did not see exactly what happened next, because it happened in the space between one blink and the next, and her brain, which had already been pushed past its operational limits, simply refused to render the image in full resolution. She saw Alaric's hand move. She saw the creature's body go rigid. She saw ash falling, slow, soft, like snow, if snow were made of the remains of something that should never have existed. It settled on the floor, on her shoes, on the examination table. The clinic was silent. Even the dogs had stopped barking. Alaric straightened his cuffs, left cuff, then right. The gesture was so mundane, so reflexive, so completely out of proportion to what had just happened, that Nessa's brain latched onto it with the desperation of a drowning person grabbing a piece of wood. He straightened his cuffs. Like clearing a paper jam, like brushing lint off a sleeve, like this was an interruption in his evening rather than the ending of a life, or whatever that thing had possessed instead of a life. Nessa slid down the wall. She sat on the floor, not because she was afraid, because the world had just gotten bigger, and the floor was the only thing in the room that she was sure of. General Whiskers wandered out from behind a shelf. He had been hiding, which was uncharacteristic, but even a cat with one eye, and no survival instinct, recognizes the presence of something that outranks it on the food chain. He walked over to Nessa and sat in her lap, which he never did, and she held him, which she always did. Alaric looked at her. She looked at him. His teeth. She had seen them, just for a second, when he had handled the creature. Long, sharp, not human, not even close to human. The kind of teeth that belonged to something that lived in the dark and ate the things that other things were afraid of.
"You are a vampire," she said. He did not deny it. The creature that attacked.
That was a vampire. A feral, unregistered, drawn here by my scent. Your scent, from when you visited. Yes. So this is your fault. Yes. She waited for the excuse. The justification, the explanation that would minimize his responsibility, or redirect blame, or soften the reality that she had nearly been torn apart by a gray-skinned monster because a vampire decided to bring a fake injured raven to her clinic as a romantic gesture. He did not offer one. "It is my fault," he said. "I visited. I left a trace. It drew the feral here. You were in danger because of me." Nessa's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Her hands were shaking. General Whiskers was purring, which was the cat's response to every crisis, his one coping mechanism, a tiny motor of denial humming against her chest. She looked at the ash on the floor. She looked at her shoes, dusted gray. She looked at the fire extinguisher lying on its side across the room. "My supplies," she said. Alaric looked at the scattered bottles and boxes. The shelf. All of that was organized. It took me 3 hours to organize that shelf. Her voice was steady, too steady. The steadiness was a wall, the same kind of wall she had built her entire life, the kind you build when you grow up in a flat with thin walls and learn early that falling apart is something you do on the inside, where no one can see. "I can replace the supplies," Alaric said. "I do not care about the supplies." "You just said you cared about the supplies." "I do not care about the supplies. I care about the fact that 15 seconds ago, something that should not exist tried to eat me in my own clinic, and you turned it into dust with your hand, and then straightened your cuffs." She held General Whiskers tighter. The cat did not protest. "What are you?" "I told you, a vampire." "How old?" "Old." "How old?" "Very." "Give me a number." 3,000. She processed this. Her face did something that was not quite a reaction, more like a series of micro-reactions stacked on top of each other, each one arriving and departing before it could fully form, a cascade of shock and disbelief and recalculation that ended not in fear, but in something closer to exhaustion. 3,000 years. Approximately. "And the wedding. Your brother's wedding. Dorian. He is getting married to a half-fae." "A half-fae. Fae. As in fairy." "I know what fae means. I have read books." She stood up. General Whiskers complained, and then adjusted, and then went back to sleep, because cats are adaptable in the way that small mammals must be adaptable when the world around them keeps doing things that make no sense. Nessa stood in her clinic, in the ash of a creature that had tried to end her, holding a cat, looking at a 3,000-year-old vampire who had straightened his cuffs after destroying a monster. She should have been terrified. Every rational part of her brain was issuing evacuation orders, flashing red, sounding alarms that said run and hide, and pretend this did not happen, and go back to the world where the scariest thing was an electricity bill. She looked at Alaric. He was standing perfectly still, the way he always stood, and she realized now that the stillness was not composure. It was control. The kind of control you maintain when you are something powerful, and you are in a room with something fragile, and you are terrified of breaking it. He was afraid, not of the feral, not of the danger, of her, of hurting her, of being seen by her, of existing in the same space as someone who now knew what he was, and could decide, at any moment, to walk away and never come back, and there would be nothing he could do about it, because you cannot force a person to stay, not even if you are 3,000 years old, and can turn creatures to ash with your hands, and own a cathedral, and have a steward named Lena, who probably already has a contingency plan for this exact scenario. Nessa looked at him, and she saw the fear, and she did something that she had not planned, and that she could not explain, and that she would spend the next several weeks trying to understand. She took General Whiskers, walked over to Alaric, and placed the cat in his arms. Alaric looked down at the cat. The cat looked up at him. General Whiskers, who had survived traffic, dogs, a one-eye surgery, and the complete collapse of the natural order, looked at the most powerful vampire in the world and purred. Alaric held the cat. He held it the way a person holds something they do not know how to hold but are determined not to drop, carefully, with both hands, with a concentration that was disproportionate to the size of the animal and absolutely proportionate to the magnitude of the moment. "The wedding," Nessa said. "Is it a vampire wedding?" He nodded. She reached up and wiped ash from her cheek, looked at the gray dust on her fingers, looked at the shattered door, looked at the animals in the kennels, who were beginning to calm down, looked at the man holding her cat. "I am going to need a dress that covers my neck," she said. Alaric looked at her. She looked back. The gear did not just turn, it broke free. Whatever mechanism had been rusted and frozen inside him for 600 years cracked open, and the gears engaged, and the machinery began to move, and it was noisy, and rough, and painful, the way all things are painful when they come back to life, after being still for too long. He did not smile, but the muscle twitched, and this time it stayed. "I will arrange it," he said. "The dress? Everything." Nessa nodded. She took General Whiskers back from his arms. She looked at the destroyed clinic. "First, you are going to help me clean up and explain everything from the beginning. 3,000 years of everything. That may take some time. I have until 7 a.m. Start talking." He talked. For the first time in centuries, Alaric Voss talked. Not the way he talked to his court, measured and strategic. Not the way he talked to his steward, efficient and directive. He talked the way Dorian had always wanted him to talk. The way he had talked before Prague, before the walls went up and the windows got bricked, and the cathedral became a fortress. He talked and Nessa listened, and the night turned, and the clinic was a mess, and General Whiskers slept, and somewhere in Mayfair, Lena Hargrove's phone buzzed with an alert from the familiar she had stationed outside the clinic, and the alert said that a feral had been destroyed, and the mortal was alive, and Alaric was still there. Lena read the alert. She read it again. He was still there. She set the phone down. She looked at the ceiling. She allowed herself precisely 4 seconds of something that in another person might have been hope. Then she started making calls, because if Nessa Adjei was going to a vampire royal wedding, there was work to do. Security protocols to establish, etiquette briefings to prepare, a dress to commission. A guest profile to create that would explain to 1,000 years of vampire aristocracy why the sovereign of the Voss line was bringing a human veterinary technician to the most important social event in a century. She did not sleep for the next 3 days. But she was smiling while she did not sleep, and Lena Hargrove did not smile often enough for that to mean nothing. The Voss estate in the English countryside was not what Nessa had expected. She had expected a house. A large house, certainly. Maybe a mansion. She had grown up watching period dramas with her mother on Sunday evenings, and she had a mental catalog of what wealthy people's homes looked like. Stone facades, ivy, gravel drives, gardens maintained by people who never seemed to exist, despite the evidence of their labor. The Voss estate was a cathedral. An actual Gothic cathedral, dropped in the middle of 40 acres of countryside like God had sneezed it there during an architectural brainstorm and never cleaned up. Flying buttresses, rose windows, a bell tower that climbed into the gray English sky like a finger pointing at something it did not approve of. The whole thing was made of dark stone that had been old when Nessa's great-great-grandparents were learning to walk. The car that brought her, a black sedan driven by a vampire named Philip who had not spoken a single word during the 2-hour drive from London and who communicated his thoughts about the journey exclusively through the angle of his rearview mirror adjustments, pulled up to the front entrance. Nessa got out. She looked at the cathedral. If a haunted house had a trust fund, she said. General Whiskers, in a carrier beside her, said nothing. Biscuit, the 3-legged dog, whimpered. Professor Tiny, the blind hamster, was in a travel cage on the back seat, running on his wheel with the oblivious determination of a creature that could not see where it was going and had decided this was not a relevant concern. She had brought all of them. This had been non-negotiable. Alaric had offered to arrange care for her animals in London. Nessa had looked at him with an expression that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees, and said, "They come with me, or I do not come at all." And that had been the end of that conversation. Lena met her at the door. The steward was wearing her usual gray suit, which Nessa was beginning to suspect was not a suit at all, but a uniform, or possibly a statement of philosophical principle. "Miss Adjei, welcome. This is a cathedral." "It is. He lives in a cathedral. He has lived in many things. This is the current one. It has gargoyles. 17. They are decorative." "Are they?" Lena's mouth did the thing. The micro-twitch. "Some of them are less decorative than others." Nessa picked up General Whiskers' carrier. The cat pressed his face against the mesh and stared at the cathedral with his one good eye, showing more interest in architecture than he had ever shown in anything that was not food or the inside of a sink. Lena led her inside. The entrance hall was vast. The word vast did not do it justice. It was the kind of space that made your footsteps echo and your thoughts shrink. Stone columns rose on either side, carved with patterns that Nessa recognized from exactly 0 art history classes, because she had never taken art history, because art history did not fix broken animals, and broken animals were what she had dedicated her life to. The ceiling was vaulted. Arches crossed overhead like the ribs of a creature big enough to swallow the building. The light came from fixtures that had been added later, modern bulbs in ancient iron brackets, a compromise between centuries that pleased no one and illuminated everything. "Your suite is on the 2nd floor," Lena said. "It has been prepared for you and your animals. The dog will have a designated outdoor area. The cat will have access to the entire east wing. The hamster's cage has been placed in a corner that receives indirect light, which I am told is optimal for hamsters. You researched hamster care. I research everything, including me." Lena did not deny this. She led Nessa up a staircase that was wide enough for a car and made of stone, worn smooth by centuries of feet. The steps dipped in the center, shallow bowls carved by time, and Nessa thought about all the people who had climbed these stairs before her, and how none of them had probably been carrying a one-eyed cat in a plastic carrier. The suite was large, not aggressively large, just confidently large, the way the wealthy do things, as if excess is not excess but simply adequate. A bedroom with a bed that could sleep 4, a sitting room with furniture that looked old enough to have opinions, a bathroom with a tub the size of a small pool. Nessa set the carriers down. She released General Whiskers, who immediately began an inspection of the premises, jumping from surface to surface with the methodical intensity of a building inspector with a one-eye handicap. Biscuit hobbled out of her carrier and went directly to the bed, climbed onto it, circled 3 times, and collapsed. 3 legs or 4, the ritual was the same. Professor Tiny continued running on his wheel. The wheel squeaked. It was the only normal sound in the room. "The tailor will arrive at 4, Lena said, "for your fitting." "The tailor?" "For the wedding gown." "I do not need a gown. You are attending a vampire royal wedding, as the companion of the sovereign of the Voss bloodline. You need a gown. I was going to wear a black dress I got at a second-hand shop in Peckham. You are not wearing a second-hand dress to a 1,000-year-old cathedral filled with immortal aristocrats. Why not? It is a good dress. I am certain it is a fine dress. It is not the dress for this occasion." "What is the dress for this occasion?" "The dress that makes them take you seriously." Nessa looked at Lena. There was something in the steward's voice that was different. Not warmer exactly, but less structured, as if the sentence had come from a part of Lena that was not the steward, but the woman underneath the steward, the one who had spent 8 centuries watching other women walk into rooms full of powerful people and be dismissed. "You are trying to help me," Nessa said. "I am doing my job." "No, you are trying to help me. That is different." Lena straightened her jacket, the gesture she did when she was buying time. "The vampire court is not a kind place. It is beautiful and ancient and fascinating, and it will eat you alive if you are not prepared." "And you think a dress will prepare me?" "I think armor comes in many forms." Nessa sat on the edge of the bed. Biscuit rearranged herself to accommodate this intrusion, and then went back to sleep. General Whiskers jumped onto a windowsill and discovered that the window overlooked 40 acres of English countryside and a formal garden that had been maintained for 3 centuries by staff who took their work extremely seriously. "Tell me about them," Nessa said. "The old houses. The people who will be at the wedding. Tell me what I am walking into." Lena sat in the chair across from the bed. She crossed her ankles. She looked at Nessa for a moment, assessing, calculating, deciding how much truth this woman could hold. The vampire aristocracy is divided into approximately 12 major houses. Each house controls territory, resources, and political influence. They have been intermarrying for millennia. They view bloodline as sacred, and they view mixing with non-vampire species as a threat to their power structure. And Dorian is marrying a half-fae. Alara, yes. And that is a problem. It is a political earthquake. If a member of the Voss family, the ruling house, can marry outside the bloodlines, it sets a precedent. Other houses will follow. The monopoly on power through marriage dissolves. The old families lose their primary mechanism of control. So this is not really about love. It is about love. That is what makes it dangerous. If it were strategic, they could calculate against it. You cannot calculate against someone who simply does not care about your calculations. And me, a human, at this wedding. Lena looked at her. The look was frank, which was rare for Lena, who normally communicated through layers of professional distance. You are the most provocative choice Alaric could have made. A human, with no supernatural lineage, no political value, no connection to any faction. You are, forgive me, nobody. I am aware of my nobody status, thank you. It is your greatest advantage. Every aristocrat at that wedding will try to determine what you represent, what strategy you serve, what Alaric is communicating by choosing you. And the answer, the truth, is that you represent nothing. You serve no strategy. You are there because he wants you there, and that will terrify them. Why? Because a sovereign who makes choices based on desire, rather than calculation, is unpredictable, and the one thing vampire aristocracy fears above all else is unpredictability. Nessa processed this. She stroked Biscuit's ear. The dog sighed in her sleep, the deep, satisfied sigh of a creature that has found a warm surface and has no intention of leaving it. He does not actually want me there, Nessa said. Lena's expression shifted. Something crossed her face that was too complex to name and too fast to catch. He does. He wants me there because I am disruptive, because bringing a human is a statement, because it makes the old houses focus on me instead of on Dorian and his half-fey bride. I am a distraction. Lena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had a quality that Nessa had not heard in it before, something almost gentle. You may be right. That may be part of his reasoning. Alaric is a strategic creature, and he has been strategic for 3,000 years, and strategy is the language he thinks in. She paused. But I have served him for 812 years. I have watched him make 1,000 strategic decisions, and I have never, not once, seen him straighten his cuffs after a confrontation, and then stand outside in the dark for 11 minutes, because he could not stop thinking about the person he just protected. The room was quiet. The hamster wheel squeaked. General Whiskers had found a curtain and was climbing it, which was going to be a problem later, but was currently providing comic relief that neither of them acknowledged. He stood outside for 11 minutes? 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I timed it. You time how long he stands places. I time everything. It is my job. Nessa looked at her hands. She turned them over. She looked at the calluses on her palms from handling animals, the small scar on her left thumb from a dog bite, the short nails she kept trimmed because long nails and veterinary work were incompatible. These were not the hands of someone who belonged at a vampire royal wedding. These were the hands of someone who belonged elbow-deep in a mastiff at 4 a.m. The tailor, she said. 4 o'clock? 4 o'clock. Can the dress be black? You want to wear black to a wedding? I am not wearing white to someone else's wedding. That is unhinged. Lena almost smiled, the closest she had come to a smile in Nessa's presence. It was like watching ice melt in real time, a process that was technically happening, but required patience and a willingness to believe in its possibility. I will inform the tailor. Lena left. Nessa sat on the bed with her dog and her cat on the curtain, and her hamster on the wheel, and she looked around the room, this impossible room, in this impossible cathedral, and she thought about the word armor. Armor comes in many forms. She thought about her mother, who had arrived in London from Accra with nothing but a suitcase and a stubbornness that bordered on geological, and who had raised 2 children in a council flat and never once apologized for who she was or where she came from. Her mother's armor had been silence. Not the silence of someone who has nothing to say, but the silence of someone who has chosen not to say it and is daring you to notice. Nessa's armor was different. Hers was noise. It was the sarcasm and the quick answers and the refusal to be impressed by anything, even when she was impressed, especially when she was impressed. She had built this armor young, in a neighborhood where being soft was being available, and she had worn it so long it felt like skin. But Lena was talking about a different kind of armor, the kind that is made of silk and stiffened with purpose and cut to say something without opening your mouth, the kind that walks into a room of predators and says, I know what you are, and I am not leaving. At 4 o'clock, the tailor arrived. He was a vampire named Sebastian Crane, who was 400 years old and had been dressing the vampire aristocracy since the Restoration. He was thin and precise, and moved his hands when he talked, as if conducting an invisible orchestra. He took one look at Nessa, and his eyes went wide, and then narrow, and then wide again, a rapid-fire assessment that covered her height, her proportions, her posture, her skin tone, and the existential implications of dressing a human for a vampire event, all in approximately 3 seconds. "She wants black," Lena said from the doorway. Sebastian looked at Nessa. Nessa looked at Sebastian. "Not funeral black," Nessa said. "I do not want to look like I am attending a memorial. Just black. Normal black. The black that means I am here, and I am not trying to compete with the bride." Sebastian's hands moved. He circled her. He did not touch her. He did not need to touch her. He was seeing her the way a sculptor sees a block of marble, not as what it is, but as what it could become. "Black," he said, and the word sounded different in his mouth, as if he had taken the concept and elevated it. But not simple black, not the absence of color, the presence of every color, compressed until it becomes something more than any single shade could achieve. "You are very intense about black. I have been dressing people for 400 years. I am very intense about everything." The fitting took 3 hours. Sebastian brought fabrics that Nessa had never seen before, materials that moved in ways that normal fabric did not move, that caught light in ways that normal fabric did not catch light. He draped and pinned and stepped back and draped again, and Nessa stood on a small platform and watched herself in a mirror that was older than her family's recorded history, and saw a version of herself she did not recognize. Not a better version, not a worse version, just a different one. The version that this dress was designed to create. A woman who could walk into a room of immortals and not flinch. "The neckline," Sebastian said. "High." "High," Nessa confirmed. "Covering the neck." Sebastian paused. He looked at her. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Understanding, mixed with something that might have been respect. "Covering the neck. Of course. In a room full of vampires, covering the neck is not modesty. It is a refusal. It says I am not available." "It says what I want it to say. It says everything." He finished the fitting. The dress would be ready in 3 days. He left with his fabrics and his pins and his intensity. And Nessa stood in her room and looked out the window at the gathering dusk. Alaric found her there. He appeared in the doorway the way he appeared everywhere, without sound, without warning, as if the air simply rearranged itself to accommodate him. "The suite is adequate?" he said. "The suite is bigger than my apartment." "It is not adequate. It is absurd. I can offer a smaller room." "Do not. I have already claimed this one. General Whiskers has marked the curtains." They looked at each other across the room. The light was dim, the way English light gets in the evening, when the sky cannot decide between gray and gold and settles for a moody combination that makes everything look like a painting of something that happened a long time ago. "Nessa." "Alaric. Thank you for coming." She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway, and the light from the corridor was behind him, and he was a silhouette, tall and dark and still, and she could not see his face, but she could hear his voice, and his voice was doing the thing it had done in the clinic, the thing where the control slipped, and something old and tired and honest came through. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "I have not done anything. I have arrived at your cathedral, and allowed a man named Sebastian to drape expensive fabric on me, and I have let my cat destroy your curtains. None of that deserves thanks." "It does." "Why?" "Because you are here." The simplicity of it. 3 words, because you are here. No elaboration, no strategy, no diplomatic subtext, just the raw, undecorated fact that her presence, the physical reality of her existing in this space, meant something to him. She did not know what to do with that. She had spent 28 years accumulating tools for dealing with the world. Sarcasm for deflection, humor for distance, work for avoidance. These tools had served her well. They had kept her upright through vet school, and debt, and loneliness, and the particular quiet of a studio apartment at 3 in the morning, when even the laundromat was silent, and the only sound was a hamster wheel turning and turning in the dark. None of her tools worked here. So she stood at the window, and he stood at the door, and between them was a room full of expensive furniture and sleeping animals, and the gathering dark of an English evening. And neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full. Full of the things they would eventually say, and the things they would never say, and the distance between those two categories, which was narrowing, slowly, the way a river narrows before it drops off a cliff, and neither of them knew what was at the bottom, but both of them could hear the water. "Dinner," Lena's voice said from the corridor, audible and intentional, a rescue operation disguised as hospitality. "Miss Ajay, I have arranged for a meal in the dining room." Nessa looked away from Alaric. The spell broke, or rather, it paused. Spells do not break between people who are not yet willing to admit there is a spell. "Dinner," Nessa said, "in the dining room of a Gothic cathedral." "The table seats 40, Lena said. "Of course it does. You will be the only one eating." "Because vampires do not eat." "Correct. So I will be sitting alone at a table for 40, eating dinner, while no one eats with me. Alaric will sit with you. He does not eat, but he will sit." Nessa looked at Alaric. He looked at her. "I will bring my cereal," she said. "Your cereal. I brought my own cereal. I do not trust rich people food. I assure you, the kitchen staff can prepare anything you desire. I desire cereal. Specifically, chocolate cereal with too much milk. It is the food of my people, and by my people I mean me, specifically, at 3 in the morning, when my shift ends, and the world is quiet, and cereal is the only thing that makes sense." Alaric looked at Lena. Lena looked at Alaric. "Cereal," he said. "In the grand dining room," Lena confirmed. "At a table for 40. With chocolate milk." He watched Nessa walk past him to the corridor. She was wearing her hedgehog scrubs and one sock because the other had been claimed by General Whiskers, who had dragged it under the bed for reasons known only to himself. She walked toward the dining room of a Gothic cathedral to eat cereal alone, at a table that had hosted vampire royalty for 300 years. Alaric watched her go. The gear turned, and did not stop. Lady Seraphina Ashworth arrived 3 days before the wedding, which was 2 days before anyone had expected her, and exactly on time for her own purposes. She came in a convoy, 3 cars, all white, because Seraphina had long ago decided that her personal aesthetic was the opposite of the Voss family's preferred darkness, and she wielded contrast like a blade. Her hair was platinum, cut to her jawline with the precision of a surgical instrument. Her skin was pale even by vampire standards, porcelain taken past its logical conclusion into the territory of deliberate fragility, the kind of beauty that existed to make you afraid of breaking it so you would never notice how hard it actually was. She walked into the cathedral without waiting to be announced, because Seraphina did not wait for things. Things waited for her. Lena met her in the entrance hall. The two women regarded each other with the careful neutrality of generals, meeting before a battle that both knew was coming. "Lady Ashworth, you were not expected until Friday. I finished my preparations early. I thought I might offer my assistance with the wedding arrangements. The arrangements are complete. Then I will offer my company. Your company is always welcome." This was a lie so polished, it could have been displayed in a museum, and both of them knew it, and neither acknowledged it, because vampire society ran on lies of exactly this quality, and to point one out would be like criticizing the mortar in a wall, while the wall was holding up the ceiling. Seraphina moved through the cathedral with the familiarity of someone who had been there before and intended to be there again, which was true on both counts. She had been Alaric's political match once, centuries ago, an arrangement that had never been formalized but that had been understood by every major house as inevitable. Alaric and Seraphina, the sovereign and the aristocrat, a union that would have cemented the alliance between the two most powerful vampire families in Europe. It had not happened. The reasons were not discussed. The reasons involved Prague, and Prague was not discussed. But Seraphina had never accepted the unhappening, not publicly, not officially. She had simply waited, with the patience of an immortal who had nothing but time, and nothing to spend it on but the maintenance of a position she refused to relinquish. She found out about Nessa within 45 minutes of arrival. This was not because anyone told her. It was because Seraphina had spent her entire existence reading rooms, reading glances, reading the micro-adjustments in staff behavior that indicated something had changed. The staff moved differently. They moved with the nervous energy of people who were managing two priorities instead of one. And the second priority was new and unfamiliar and involved, if she was reading the signs correctly, a human. She found Nessa in the library. Nessa was sitting in a leather armchair that was 3 times her size, eating an apple, reading a book about Scottish castles that she had found on the shelf, and wearing a jumper that said, "I survived vet school and all I got was this massive debt," which she had purchased as a graduation gift to herself, and which she wore with the defiant pride of someone who has earned the right to be tacky. General Whiskers was asleep on the book, not beside the book, on it. Nessa was reading around him. Serafina entered the library. She did not announce herself. She simply materialized in the doorway in a white dress that probably cost more than Nessa's student loans, and stood there, radiant, perfect, and smiling, in the way that expensive things smile, which is not with warmth but with the assurance that they are worth looking at. Nessa looked up. The 2 women regarded each other. Nessa saw a woman who was everything she was not. Tall, elegant, immortal, dressed in white silk that moved like it was alive. A face that had been beautiful for centuries, and would be beautiful for centuries more, the kind of beauty that does not age, because it was never really about youth in the first place. It was about structure, about precision, about the meticulous cultivation of an image that left no room for accident. Serafina saw a woman eating an apple in a rude jumper with a sleeping cat on her book. "You must be Nessa," Serafina said. "You must be someone who walks into rooms without knocking." The smile widened. It was like watching glass stretch. "I am Serafina Ashworth. I am an old friend of Alaric's." Old, as in you have known him a long time, or old as in you are personally old? Both. Cool. Nessa took a bite of the apple. She did not stand. She did not adjust her posture. She did not perform any of the tiny physical adjustments that people make when they encounter someone who outranks them socially, financially, or aesthetically, because Nessa did not operate on that system. Her system was simpler. Was this person kind? Were they honest? Could they be trusted around animals? Everything else was decoration. Serafina sat in the chair opposite. She sat the way a queen sits, which is to say she did not sit so much as arrange herself into a position of elegant repose that turned the chair into a throne and the library into a court. "I understand you are Alaric's companion for the wedding. That is the plan." How brave of him to make such an unconventional choice. Nessa heard it, the cut, hidden in the compliment like a razor in silk. Brave, unconventional, 2 words that sounded like praise and meant the opposite. Brave meant foolish, unconventional meant wrong. "I am a vet tech from South London," Nessa said. "Unconventional is generous. You must feel so out of your depth." There it was, the second cut. Delivered with the same perfect smile, the same warm tone, the same expression of concerned friendship that was about as genuine as General Whiskers' survival instincts. "That is not an insult, darling," Serafina added. "It is an observation. I know the difference between an observation and an insult. I also know when someone is doing both at the same time and pretending it is neither." The library was very quiet. Somewhere in the cathedral, a clock ticked. General Whiskers shifted on the book. The apple was getting down to the core. Serafina's smile did not waver. It was impressive, the way engineering is impressive. Load-bearing, structural, designed to withstand pressure from any direction. "I meant no offense. Of course not. I simply think it must be overwhelming. This world, these people. Alaric himself. He is not an easy man. I have noticed. He has expectations, obligations, a position that demands a certain kind of partner. A certain kind. Someone who understands the court, the politics, the history, the weight of 3,000 years." Nessa set the apple core on the side table. She looked at Serafina. She looked at her the way she looked at animals when they came into the clinic, not with judgment, but with assessment. What was this creature? What did it need? What was it afraid of? "You mean someone like you," Nessa said. The smile flickered, just once. A single frame dropped from an otherwise perfect projection. "I did not say that. You did not have to." Nessa stood. She was shorter than Serafina. She was wearing a rude jumper and socks without shoes, because one of her shoes was under the bed where General Whiskers had put it. She had apple juice on her chin, and a sleeping cat was drooling on a book about Scottish castles, and none of this was elegant, or powerful, or impressive. "I am a vet tech," she said. "I have been elbow-deep in a mastiff's intestines at 4 in the morning. I have held animals while they died, and I have told their owners, and I have driven home alone, and eaten cereal in the dark, and gone back the next day, and done it again. I do not need you to tell me I am out of my depth. I have been out of my depth since I was 18 years old, working 3 jobs to pay for school, and I am still here." She picked up General Whiskers. The cat woke, annoyed, and then settled against her chest with the practiced ease of a creature that has been picked up 1,000 times and has accepted it as a fact of existence. "You are going to have to try harder than mean girl sparkle talk to rattle me." The room was very still. In the doorway behind them, a vampire lord named Edmund Hale, who had arrived that morning for the wedding and who had been passing the library on his way to his chambers, heard the exchange and laughed into his glass. It was a short laugh, quickly suppressed, the kind of laugh that happens when something genuinely delightful occurs in a world that has not been genuinely delightful in a very long time. Serafina heard the laugh. She did not turn, but something behind her eyes changed. Not anger. Something more careful than anger. A recalculation. A reevaluation. She had expected the human to crumble. Humans crumbled. They crumbled under the weight of vampire presence, under the pressure of ancient beauty, under the simple, crushing awareness of being mortal in a room of immortals. This one did not crumble. This one had calluses on her hands, and apple juice on her chin, and a one-eyed cat, and absolutely no interest in the games that Serafina had been playing for 1,200 years. "Well," Serafina said, "how refreshing." She left. She walked out of the library with the same poise she had walked in with, her white dress trailing behind her, her platinum hair catching the light, her smile back in place. Nessa watched her go. When the sound of Serafina's footsteps had faded, Nessa sat back down in the armchair, picked up the book about Scottish castles, and realized her hands were shaking. She held them in front of her face, looked at them. The calluses, the scar, the short nails, shaking. "Stupid," she said to General Whiskers. "That was stupid. Do not tell anyone my hands are shaking." The cat yawned. Across the cathedral, in a corridor she could not see, Alaric stood in a shadow. He had heard everything, vampire hearing, 200 feet, every word, every pause, every breath. He had heard Nessa say, "I have been out of my depth since I was 18 years old, and I am still here." The gear turned. Something inside him that had been frozen for 6 centuries cracked, and the crack went deep, past the strategy and the control and the 3,000-year-old architecture of self-protection, down to a part of him that he had bricked up along with the windows. He did not go to her. He did not step out of the shadow. He did not say the thing that was forming in his chest, the thing that had no strategy behind it, and no political value, and no purpose, except to be said, because it was true. He stood in the dark, and he let the truth exist, without saying it. But he knew. He knew the way you know when the season changes, not from the calendar but from the air. Something had shifted. Something was shifting, and it was not going to shift back. That evening, the first of the wedding guests arrived in earnest. They came in groups. The Morel family from France, who traveled in a fleet of vintage cars that moved in formation like a motorcade of well-dressed ghosts. The Devereux clan from Belgium, 6 of them, all tall, all angular, all wearing variations of the same expression, which suggested that they found the world adequate but disappointing. The Petrov contingent from Eastern Europe, including the twin who bites, whose name was Katya, and whose sister, Marta, spent the entire arrival smoothing over the social consequences of Katya's tendency to clamp down on things. They all knew about Nessa within an hour. The vampire court was a gossip machine of unparalleled efficiency. Information moved through it the way blood moves through veins, fast and everywhere at once, and the information about the sovereign's human companion hit the system like a contaminant. By dinner time, every arriving guest had formed an opinion. These opinions ranged from audacious, the Morels, who appreciated audacity as a matter of cultural principle, to insulting, the Ashworths, who viewed anything they did not control as an insult, too interesting. Edmund Hale, who found most things interesting and most people boring, and who had laughed in the library doorway and was already composing a mental essay about what he had witnessed. Nessa did not know any of this. She was in her suite, eating cereal, sitting on the floor because the chairs were too formal and the bed had been claimed by Biscuit, and she was thinking about what Lena had said. Armor comes in many forms. She looked at the garment bag hanging on the wardrobe door. Sebastian had delivered the dress that afternoon. She had not opened the bag. She was saving it, or avoiding it. The distinction was unclear. She thought about Serafina, about the smile that did not reach the eyes, about the way the words had been arranged, each one a tiny weapon, each one designed to find a gap in the armor and press. She thought about Alaric, about the way he stood in doorways, about the way he said, "Because you are here," about the way his face did not do things, except sometimes, when he was not watching himself, it almost did. General Whiskers climbed into her cereal bowl, which was empty except for chocolate milk residue. He began licking the bowl. The sound was obscene and deeply comforting. "We are in a cathedral," Nessa said to the cat. "We are in a Gothic cathedral, in the English countryside, surrounded by immortal aristocrats, and one of them is actively hostile to me, and the rest are forming opinions about me based on information they gathered through a gossip network that has been operational for centuries, and I am sitting on the floor eating cereal." The cat licked the bowl. "And tomorrow more of them arrive. And the day after that is the rehearsal dinner. And the day after that is the wedding. And I will walk into a room full of creatures that can hear my heartbeat, and I will be the only warm body in the building." The cat finished with the bowl and climbed into her lap. "Lena says armor comes in many forms." She looked at the garment bag. "I think she might be right." She opened the bag. The dress was black, but not the black she had expected. Not the simple, functional black of the second-hand dress in Peckham. This was a different thing entirely. This was the black that Sebastian had described, the presence of every color compressed, until it became something more. The fabric absorbed light, but also seemed to hold it, like the surface of deep water at night. It moved when she touched it, responding to her fingers with a fluidity that was almost alive. High neckline, long sleeves, a cut that followed the body without clinging to it, that suggested shape without revealing it. It was elegant and modest and fierce, and when Nessa held it up in front of the mirror, she saw what Sebastian had seen. Not a woman out of her depth, a woman who had chosen to be here. She hung it back on the wardrobe. She went to bed. General Whiskers curled up on the pillow beside her, his one eye closed, his purr a small motor in the dark. She did not sleep well. She dreamed of gray-skinned creatures and ash on her shoes, and a man standing in a doorway saying, "Because you are here." But she slept. And in the morning, she watered the succulent she had brought from her apartment, the dead one, and she did not feel foolish for doing it. Some things deserve to be cared for, even when they have stopped growing. Especially then. The rehearsal dinner was held in the cathedral's great hall, a room that had been designed for the glory of God, and was now being used for the glory of catering. The hall was immense. Stone walls rose 40 feet to a ceiling that was lost in shadow, painted with scenes that Nessa could not make out in the candlelight, but that she suspected were either religious, or violent, or both. The table ran the length of the room, a single oak slab that must have come from a tree the size of a building, and it was set with crystal, and silver, and flowers, the color of old blood. The guests were already seated when Nessa arrived. 50 vampires, arrayed along the table like a gallery of paintings come to life. Beautiful, every single one of them. Beautiful in ways that made the word feel inadequate, as if beauty were a language, and they had been speaking it for so long that it had become their native tongue, and they no longer noticed they were speaking it. Nessa noticed. She stood in the doorway in her jeans and a clean jumper, because the dress was for the wedding, and she was not wasting it on a rehearsal, and she noticed every face, every gesture, every glance that turned toward her, and assessed her, and found her wanting. She walked in anyway. Alaric was at the head of the table. He stood when she entered. He was the only one who stood. It was a small gesture, and it was enormous, and every vampire in the room saw it and understood it. and the calculations began. Nessa sat beside him. The chair was enormous. She felt like a child in a furniture showroom. Dorian was across the table, 2 seats down. Nessa had met him the day before, and the meeting had confounded every expectation she had formed about vampire royalty. Dorian was warm, not vampire warm, which is not warm at all. Actually warm. He laughed. He gestured with his hands when he talked. He had a habit of leaning forward when he was interested in something, which was often, because Dorian was interested in most things. He looked like Alaric in the way that a sketch looks like a finished painting. The same structure, the same height, but where Alaric was still and dark and controlled, Dorian was kinetic and bright and uncontained. He was the Voss family's open window in a house of closed doors. Beside him was Alara, the half-fae. Nessa had met Alara that afternoon, and the meeting had been strange and beautiful and slightly unsettling. Alara was small, delicate. Her hair was the color of light itself, not blonde, not white, but actually luminous, as if photons had decided to become a hairstyle. Her eyes were green, in the way that forests are green. Not a single shade, but a depth of shades, layered over each other. And when she smiled, the air around her shimmered. She had taken Nessa's hand and said, "I am so glad you are here. Alaric needs someone who is not afraid to poke him. You know about the poking?" Dorian told me. He said you poked the sovereign of the Voss bloodline in the chest on a public street and demanded his insurance information, and that it was the greatest moment in the last 600 years of vampire history. Nessa had liked Alara immediately. This was rare. Nessa did not like people immediately. She liked animals immediately. People required evidence. But Alara had shown her how to make light with her hands, a fae trick that involved cupping her palms together and whispering something in a language that sounded like wind through leaves. And when she opened her hands, a small sphere of golden light floated up and drifted around the room like a tiny, lazy sun. General Whiskers had tried to eat it. Nessa had laughed. Liking was established. Now, at the rehearsal dinner, Nessa sat at the table of vampires and ate the food that had been prepared for her. The only plate of actual food, in a room of crystal glasses, filled with something she chose not to think about too carefully. She ate, and she listened, and she watched. The old houses performed. That was the word for it. Performance. Every toast was a position statement. Every compliment was a negotiation. Every laugh was calibrated to convey exactly the right amount of warmth, without committing to actual warmth, which was dangerous, because actual warmth could be used against you. Nessa found it exhausting, and fascinating, and sad. Sad because underneath all the performance, underneath the crystal and the candles and the ancient stone, these were people, immortal people, but people. And they had forgotten how to be honest with each other, or possibly they had never learned, or possibly honesty was a luxury that immortality could not afford because when you live forever, every truth you reveal becomes a permanent vulnerability. Dorian stood. He raised his glass. "Before we rehearse tomorrow's chaos," he said, and his voice was different from Alaric's, lighter, quicker, the voice of someone who found the world amusing rather than exhausting. "I want to thank you all for being here. I know this union is not traditional. I know it raises questions. I know some of you have opinions." He looked around the table. His gaze was warm, but there was iron under it. The Voss iron. The same stuff that made Alaric immovable. Dorian just wore it differently. Alara is not what the old houses expected for the Voss family. She is half fae. She glows in the dark. She talks to plants, and the plants talk back. She once convinced a river to change direction, because she asked politely. A ripple of something moved through the room. Not laughter, not displeasure, something in between. But she chose me, and I chose her. And we did not choose each other because of houses or lineages or political advantage. We chose each other because she makes the world bigger, and I have lived in a small world for too long. He looked at Alaric. The brothers' eyes met across the table, and something passed between them that Nessa could not name but could feel. A current of history, and love, and the specific complicated grief that exists between siblings who have been through things together, and then been through things apart, and are trying to find their way back. "And I want to thank my brother," Dorian said, "for being here, for bringing someone, for not standing by the blood fountain looking like a portrait of himself. Someone laughed. It might have been Edmund Hale. Alaric's jaw tightened. Then it loosened. This was the closest he came to acknowledging a compliment. The rehearsal proceeded. Toasts were made. Conversations happened. Nessa spoke to the people near her with the careful, curious openness of someone who is navigating foreign territory and has decided that the best strategy is to be exactly who she is and let the territory adjust. Some of the territory adjusted, others did not. Halfway through the evening, Dorian appeared beside her. He had moved from his seat with the fluid ease of someone who did not feel bound by seating charts, which was ironic given that Lena had spent 3 days constructing the seating chart as if it were a peace treaty. "Walk with me," he said. 5 minutes. Nessa looked at Alaric. He was in conversation with the head of the Morel family, a conversation that appeared to be conducted entirely through silences of varying lengths, like Morse code for people who found speaking tedious. She stood. She walked with Dorian out of the great hall, through a stone corridor lit by wall sconces, to a small courtyard at the cathedral's center. The night was cold and clear, and the stars were out, which was unusual for England, and felt like a gift. Dorian leaned against a stone column and looked at the sky. "You are not what I expected," he said. "Nobody ever expects the vet tech from Lewisham." He smiled. It was a real smile, unpracticed, the kind that changes a face rather than decorating it. "I expected a strategist, a politician, someone from the old houses that Alaric had chosen to make a point. Instead, he chose you. I am not sure he chose me so much as I happened to be in the road when his car came along. That is called fate. That is called reckless driving." Dorian laughed. The laugh echoed off the stone walls and bounced around the courtyard and startled a bat, which flew out of a crevice and disappeared into the dark with the panicked flap of something that has been woken up by joy. "You are not using her, are you?" Nessa said. Dorian looked at her. His smile faded. Not to nothing, to something more serious. "Ilara? To make a point, to the old houses, by marrying someone they do not approve of. No, I am marrying her, because she is the first person in 800 years who looked at me and saw Dorian, not Voss, not the brother of the sovereign, not the second son, just me, and the political consequences are real, and I do not care. You care a little. I care a little, but caring a little about consequences is not the same as letting consequences make your decisions. I spent centuries letting consequences decide things for me. I woke up one morning and realized I had lived 800 years without ever choosing anything for myself." He looked at the stars. "Ilara is my choice, my first real choice, and I will hold it against every consequence that comes." Nessa said nothing for a moment. She leaned against the opposite column and looked at the sky and thought about choices, about the choice to go to vet school, about the choice to work overnight shifts, about the choice to water a dead plant and rescue a one-eyed cat and say yes to a vampire who asked her to a wedding. "He is not using me either," she said. Dorian looked at her. "Your brother. He is not using me to make a point. I thought he was, at first, but he is not." "How do you know?" "Because I asked him, and he said, 'Because you are here.' And the way he said it was not strategic. It was not calculated. It was just true. Alaric does not do just true. He did that night." Dorian studied her. The way he studied things was different from Alaric. Where Alaric observed with the detached precision of a strategist, Dorian observed with the hungry curiosity of a person who finds people endlessly interesting and wants to understand them not for advantage, but for the simple pleasure of understanding. "He has not been himself for a long time," Dorian said, "since Prague." The word landed between them. Prague, the locked door, the room that was not discussed. "He does not talk about Prague," Nessa said. "He does not talk about anything. That is the problem. He stopped talking and started managing. He stopped living and started administrating. He turned himself into a system, and systems do not need people. Systems need inputs and outputs, and the smooth functioning of mechanisms. But he is not a system. No. He is my brother, and he has been pretending to be a system for 600 years, because being a person hurt too much." The courtyard was quiet. The stars were still there, which was reassuring. Stars do not participate in vampire politics. They do not form opinions, or attend rehearsal dinners, or smile at you with razors in their teeth. They just burn, and burn, and burn. And that consistency is a comfort. "Thank you for coming," Dorian said. "I know this is absurd. I know you are a normal person who has been dropped into an abnormal situation, and you are handling it with more grace than anyone has a right to expect. I am handling it with cereal and sarcasm. Those are forms of grace." They went back to the dinner. Nessa sat in her enormous chair, and Alaric looked at her, and she looked at him, and something had changed. Some recalculation had happened during her conversation with Dorian, and the change was in her understanding of the man beside her. He was not a system. He was a person pretending to be a system, because being a person had once cost him everything. And she was not armor. She was not a strategy. She was not a political statement. She was a person sitting in a chair that was too big for her, eating mortal food at an immortal table, and the man beside her had brought her here, not because of what she represented, but because of what she was, which was kind, and stubborn, and willing to water dead things. The dinner ended. The guests dispersed. Alaric walked Nessa to her suite. They stood in the corridor outside her door. The cathedral was quiet around them, the kind of quiet that only very old buildings achieve, a quiet that is not empty but full of all the noise that has ever happened there, compressed and stored in the stone. "Your brother thinks you stopped being a person," Nessa said. Alaric was still, the kind of still that meant he was holding something back. "He thinks you became a system, after Prague." The word, Prague. She said it, and watched it land on him, watched the impact in the way his jaw set, and his shoulders shifted, and his eyes, those gray Winter Lake eyes, went one shade darker. "Dorian has opinions about many things," Alaric said. "He has opinions because he loves you. That is what brothers do. They form opinions about the people they love, because having opinions is easier than saying the love part out loud. You have a brother?" "A sister. Amma. She lives in Birmingham. She calls me every Sunday to tell me I work too much and eat too little, and that I should date someone who is not a rescue animal. What would she say about me? She would say you need a haircut, and a warmer coat, and possibly a therapist. She would not be wrong." Nessa looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor was dim and long, and they were standing 3 feet apart, and the distance felt both enormous and insufficient. "Alaric, yes, I am not going to fix you. I want you to know that. I am not a project, and you are not a project. I fix animals. I do not fix people. People fix themselves, or they do not, and either way, it is not my job. I understand, but I am going to be honest with you, because I am not capable of being anything else. I do not have the energy for games or subtext or the kind of communication that your world runs on, where every word means 3 things and none of them are the thing that was actually said. What are you going to say? I am going to say that I think you are lonely, and I think you have been lonely for a very long time. And I think you brought me here because I am the first person in 600 years who treated you like a person instead of a position." He said nothing. "And I think that scares you more than any of the old houses, or their politics, or Serafina and her smile that could cut glass." He said nothing. "And I think you are standing in this corridor at midnight, trying to figure out the strategic implications of having feelings. And I want you to know that feelings do not have strategic implications. They just exist. They are inconvenient and messy, and they do not follow plans. They are, basically, cats." He almost smiled. The muscle twitched. The eyes warmed. For 1 second, one genuine, unstrategic second, Alaric Voss looked like a person, and not a position. "Cats," he said. "Unpredictable. Independent. They show up when they want. They leave when they want. You cannot control them. You can only make a space warm enough that they choose to stay. You are comparing my emotional life to a cat. I am comparing your emotional life to General Whiskers specifically. 1 eye, no tail, terrible survival instincts. But alive. Still alive, despite everything." The corridor was very quiet. "Good night, Alaric. Good night, Nessa." She went inside. She closed the door. She leaned against it. Her hands were shaking again. On the other side of the door, Alaric stood in the corridor. He did not move. He stood there for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. which Lena, watching from a security camera at the end of the hall, timed precisely. When he finally moved, he did not go to his study. He did not go to his chair. He went to the roof of the cathedral, to a parapet that overlooked the dark countryside, and he stood in the open air and looked at the stars. He had not stood in open air in a very long time. He had not chosen to be exposed. He had built his life around walls and ceilings and the comfort of enclosure. The air was cold. It tasted like grass and rain and the distant promise of morning. He stood there until the sky began to lighten. He did not think. He did not strategize. He did not manage or calculate or prepare. He just breathed. He did not need to breathe. Vampires do not need to breathe. But he did it anyway, because Nessa had said that feelings are like cats, and cats do not follow plans, and the only strategy is to make a space warm enough that they choose to stay. He breathed, and the breathing was the space, and the cold air was the warmth. And somewhere inside the cathedral, in a room full of sleeping animals, and a garment bag, and a dead succulent, a woman who did not fix people lay awake in the dark and felt the weight of everything she had said and everything she had not said, and the distance between the two, which was closing, slowly, the way dawn closes the distance between night and morning. Not fast, not slow. Inevitable. The morning of the wedding arrived the way mornings arrive in Scotland, which is to say reluctantly, with rain, and with the distinct impression that the sky had been asked to participate in a celebration and was not entirely on board. Nessa woke at 6. She had slept for 3 hours, which was 2 more than she expected and 1 fewer than she needed, but she had built her entire adult life on insufficient sleep, and her body had adapted to it the way a tree adapts to wind, growing at an angle that is technically wrong, but structurally sound. General Whiskers was asleep on her head. This was a new development. He had migrated from the pillow to her skull sometime around 4 a.m., and had settled there with the territorial confidence of a flag being planted on a newly conquered nation. She removed the cat. She showered. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself, and tried to see what the vampires would see when she walked into that cathedral. Brown skin, dark hair, cut to her jawline because long hair and veterinary work were incompatible, same as the nails. Brown eyes that her mother called fierce, and her sister called scary when you are angry. A body that was strong from 4 years of lifting animals, and lean from 4 years of forgetting to eat, and shaped like the body of a person who had never once considered how it looked in a gown, because gowns were not part of the vocabulary of her life. She put on the dress. Sebastian had done something impossible. The black fabric moved with her, not against her, not on her, but with her, as if it had been told who she was and had decided to help. The high neckline framed her face. The long sleeves ended at her wrists, clean and sharp. The cut was simple, deceptively simple, the kind of simplicity that takes 400 years of experience to achieve. She looked in the mirror. She did not look like a vet tech. She did not look like a nobody from Lewisham. She did not look like a woman out of her depth. She looked like someone who had walked into the room on purpose. Lena arrived at 7. She stood in the doorway and looked at Nessa and said nothing for 5 seconds, which was Lena's version of applause. The car leaves at 9, Lena said. The ceremony is at the Northern Cathedral. 2 hours drive. 2 hours in a car with vampires. Alaric will ride with you. I will be in the second vehicle, with the security detail. Security detail. 6 operatives. They will be positioned throughout the cathedral. 2 at your position. You will not see them. Am I in danger? Lena looked at her with an expression that was frank, to the point of being transparent. You are a human attending a vampire royal wedding as the companion of the sovereign. Some houses view this as a provocation. A small number may view it as an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To make a statement of their own. Nessa's stomach tightened. Not fear, not exactly. Something closer to the feeling she got before a difficult surgery. The awareness that the next few hours mattered, and that she would need to be present for every second of them. I will be fine, she said. Yes, Lena said, you will. That is not a prediction, it is a plan. The drive to the Northern Cathedral was quiet. Alaric sat across from Nessa in the back of the car, and neither of them spoke for the first 30 minutes. The Scottish countryside moved past the windows in shades of green and grey, rolling hills and low stone walls, and sheep that existed in a permanent state of philosophical indifference to the passage of time. Alaric was wearing black, of course. A suit that looked like it had been made by someone who had taken the concept of tailoring and elevated it to the status of a moral philosophy. His hair was pushed back, his face was set, his hands were folded in his lap with the controlled precision of someone who is aware that his hands could destroy things and is deliberately keeping them still. Nessa looked at him. "You look terrified," she said. "I do not look terrified. You look like you have swallowed a grenade, and you are waiting for it to go off. That is my resting expression." "No, it is not. Your resting expression is the one where you look like a marble statue that has been told a mildly disappointing piece of news. This is different. This is the expression of a man who is about to walk into a room full of people who are waiting to judge him, and he is bringing a vet tech in a black dress and a one-eyed cat." "You did not bring the cat." "I wanted to bring the cat." Lena said no. Lena was correct. Lena is always correct. It is her most annoying quality. Alaric's jaw loosened. The thing that happened when Nessa talked, the slight relaxation of the control, the small opening in the fortress, she had begun to recognize it. It was not a smile. It was the precondition for a smile, the clearing of land where a smile might someday be built. "Nessa." "Alaric, there are things you should know before we arrive. If you are about to give me a strategic briefing, I want you to know that I will listen to it, and then I will do whatever I was going to do anyway. I know. That is why I love you." The words left his mouth and entered the car and sat there between them like a live thing. Alaric did not move. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, the way tectonic plates shift, invisible on the surface, cataclysmic below. Nessa stared at him. He stared at the seat back behind her head. The car moved through the Scottish countryside. "You did not mean to say that," she said. "No, but you said it." "Yes." "And is it true?" He looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, he looked at her without the filter, without the control, without the 3,000 years of strategic management that sat between him and every other living thing like a sheet of bulletproof glass. He looked at her the way a person looks at a person. "I have not said that word in 600 years, he said. "I had decided I was not capable of it. That Prague had removed the capacity. That I had become the thing I built, the system, the machine. And machines do not love, they function." He paused. The car moved. The sheep were still there, still indifferent. "Then you poked me in the chest and demanded my insurance information, and I realized that the machine had a flaw. The flaw was shaped like a woman in frog scrubs who waters dead plants and names her cat General." The car was very quiet. Nessa looked at him, and she felt the thing she had been refusing to feel, the thing she had been holding at arm's length with sarcasm and distance, and the practiced armor of a woman who had learned early that wanting things was the first step toward losing them. She felt it, and she did not run from it. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to jurors, someone who is 3,000 years old and lives in a cathedral and can turn things to ash with his hands. I do not know how to fit into a world of vampire aristocrats and political marriages, and a woman named Serafina who smiles at me like I am an item on a menu. You do not have to fit in. I know. I was not going to. I was going to finish my sentence." He waited. "I do not know how to do any of this, but I know how to show up. That is the thing I am good at. I show up for overnight shifts, and broken animals, and a dead plant, and a cat with one eye, and no survival instincts. I show up, and I keep showing up. And right now, I am showing up for you." She reached across the space between them, and she took his hand. His hand was cold, not warm, not room temperature. Cold, the way stone is cold, the way deep water is cold, the kind of cold that has been cold for so long it has forgotten what warmth feels like. She held it anyway. He looked down at her hand on his, her hand, small and calloused and warm, his hand, long-fingered and pale and cold. The contrast was absurd. The contrast was everything. He did not squeeze. He did not pull away. He let her hold his hand, and the warmth of her moved into the cold of him, and neither of them said anything for the rest of the drive, because nothing needed to be said. Some things do not need words. They need a hand in the dark, and the willingness to hold on. The northern cathedral was older than the Voss estate. It stood on a cliff above the North Sea, a building that had been old when the idea of Scotland was young, made of stone so dark it looked like condensed night. The wind came off the water in sheets, cold and sharp, carrying the salt and iron smell of the ocean. The guests were assembled, over 100 vampires, representing every major house in Europe, and several from beyond. They filled the cathedral like a gallery of impossibly beautiful statues that had decided to attend a wedding, and the collective effect of their presence was overwhelming. The air itself felt different, denser, charged, as if the cathedral was a battery and they were the current. Nessa walked in on Alaric's arm. She wore the black dress, the high neckline, the long sleeves. Her chin was up, her spine was straight. Her heartbeat was the only heartbeat in the room, and every creature present could hear it. 112 vampires heard Nessa's heart beat, and knew she was mortal and warm and finite, and alive in a way that none of them had been alive in a very long time. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of a congregation settling, the hard silence. The silence that happens when a room full of predators encounters something unexpected and has to decide, collectively and individually, what to do about it. Nessa walked. Her shoes made sound on the stone floor, small clicks that echoed in the silence. She did not look left or right. She did not smile. She did not perform. She walked beside Alaric the way she walked into the clinic every morning, with purpose and without apology. They reached the front row. They sat. The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then the murmuring began, low and constant, the sound of 100 calculations being made simultaneously. Nessa folded her hands in her lap. She breathed. She was here. The ceremony began. A vampire elder, ancient beyond counting, presided. The words were old, older than English, older than Latin, spoken in a language that sounded like it had been borrowed from the wind, and the stone, and the deep places of the earth, where things have been alive for longer than humans have been a concept. Dorian stood at the altar. He was dressed in midnight blue, not black, because Dorian never did things the way Alaric did things, and midnight blue was his small rebellion, his wink at tradition. He looked happy. Not the performed happiness of a public figure at a public event. Real happiness. The kind that changes the shape of your face, and the quality of your voice, and the way the air moves around you. Alara came down the aisle. She was not dressed in white. She was dressed in light. The half-fae bride wore a gown that appeared to be made of dawn itself, soft gold fading to pale rose fading to the silver of early morning. And she glowed. Not metaphorically. Actually glowed. A soft, warm luminescence that came from her skin, from her hair, from the fundamental fae nature that existed in every cell of her body, and that she had spent her life learning to control, and had today decided not to. She was beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with beauty, and everything to do with joy. She was radiant, because she was radiating. She was full, and the fullness was spilling out of her in light. Dorian saw her, and his face did a thing that Nessa had never seen a vampire's face do. It crumpled. Just for a second. The composure, the 800 years of Voss dignity, the cool reserve of an immortal aristocrat, all of it crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave, and underneath was a man, watching the love of his very long life walk toward him, and the emotion was so large, and so genuine, and so ungoverned, that it changed the temperature of the room. Nessa's eyes burned. She felt the tears before she could stop them, which she could not, because she had never been able to stop tears at weddings, even weddings of people she barely knew, even a vampire wedding in a cliff-top cathedral in Scotland, where she was the only warm body in the building. She cried. She did not hide it. Alaric reached into his jacket and produced a handkerchief. He handed it to her without looking at her, a gesture so reflexive, so automatically human, that it bypassed 3,000 years of vampiric composure, and came from the place where he was just a man, sitting next to a woman who was crying at his brother's wedding. Lena, 3 rows back, saw the handkerchief. She set her jaw. She said nothing. The ceremony was stunning. The vows were spoken in the old language, and then in English, and then in Alara's fae tongue. which sounded like birdsong, and water, and the moment before sleep, when the mind lets go of the world and drifts. Dorian said, "I choose you, against every tradition, against every expectation, against every voice that says we do not belong together. I choose you, because you make the world bigger, and I have been small for too long." Elara said, "I choose you, because you are the first person who did not ask me to dim my light. You asked me to glow brighter." The cathedral was full of ancient, powerful, immortal creatures who had spent centuries building walls around their hearts, and for one moment, one brief, unguarded moment, those walls cracked. Not because the vows were grand or poetic or strategically resonant, because they were true. And truth, in a world built on calculation, is the most disruptive force there is. They kissed. The light from Elara's skin brightened and filled the cathedral, warm and golden, and for a moment, the ancient stone building was full of light, for the first time in a very long time. And the vampires sat in it, and did not burn, and did not flinch, and some of them, the older ones, the ones who remembered what light felt like, closed their eyes and let it touch them. Nessa wiped her face with the handkerchief. It smelled like old paper and clean linen, and something else, something she could not name, something that was uniquely Alaric. She kept it. The reception was held in the cathedral's great hall, which had been transformed from its earlier austerity into something that looked like a collision between a botanical garden and a very expensive dream. Flowers climbed the stone columns, dark red and deep violet, and a ghostly white that glowed faintly in the candlelight. The tables were round instead of the long single slab of the rehearsal, and they were arranged in concentric circles with the head table at the center, where Dorian and Elara sat surrounded by the warm glow that Elara had not yet dimmed and seemed in no hurry to. Nessa sat at the head table. She sat between Alaric and an empty chair that had been designated for a vampire lord who had not arrived, and whose absence was, according to Lena's quietly delivered explanation, a political statement of the most tedious kind. The reception was going well. Nessa could feel the careful equilibrium of the room, the way the old houses had decided, collectively, to accept the wedding as an accomplished fact, and to begin the work of recalculating their positions. This was not because they approved. It was because Alaric was there, and Alaric's presence made approval irrelevant. What the sovereign attends is sanctioned. What is sanctioned is not open to rebellion. Not yet, anyway. The food was elaborate, and Nessa was the only one eating it, which made her feel like a restaurant critic at a very fancy establishment, where the staff outnumbered the customers by 100 to 1. She ate what was put in front of her, because Sebastian's dress allowed no room for the cereal she would have preferred, and because Lena had spent 3 days organizing this catering, and Nessa was not about to disrespect the work. Edmund Hale stopped by her table. He was the vampire lord who had laughed in the library doorway, a man who was 500 years old, and who wore his immortality the way some people wear expensive cologne, noticeable, but not overwhelming. He had kind eyes, which was unusual for a vampire lord, and a voice that suggested he found most things amusing, and the rest merely interesting. "The woman who sent Serafina packing," he said. "I have been wanting to meet you." "I did not send her packing. She left of her own accord. She left because you were not afraid of her. That is the only weapon Serafina does not know how to fight." He sat in the empty political statement chair. "May I?" "It seems like you already have. A trait I share with cats, apparently." Nessa smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had given to anyone at this wedding who was not Dorian, Elara, or Alaric. The burrito was cold. Edmund leaned in. "How are you finding it?" "The circus." "That is a generous word for it." "It is a circus. Beautiful costumes, elaborate performances, and underneath it all, everyone is just trying not to fall off their horses. This wedding has rattled them. Dorian and his fey bride, you and Alaric, the old order is cracking, and they can hear it, and they do not know what comes next. What does come next? Something new. Something new always comes next. That is the thing about forever. It is a very long time to stay the same." Serafina stood. Nessa saw it happen from across the room. Serafina rose from her table with the controlled grace of someone who has been planning this moment and wants it to look spontaneous. She picked up her glass. She walked to the center of the room. The conversations dimmed, the attention shifted. Serafina stood in the light, platinum hair catching the candle flame, white dress luminous against the dark stone, and she smiled, and the smile was her best work, a masterpiece of warmth and sincerity, and precisely calibrated emotion. "If I may," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room, because vampire acoustics are nothing if not theatrical. A toast. The room settled. Glasses were raised. Nessa watched with the focused attention of someone who can hear a predator circling. To Dorian and his beautiful bride, to their union, which brings together two worlds that have not always understood each other, to the bravery of their choice. She paused. The pause was exquisite, timed to perfection, a beat of warmth before the turn. And to tradition, which has kept us safe for millennia, which has preserved our bloodlines, our culture, our power. Tradition is not a cage, as some would suggest. It is a foundation, and foundations are not meant to be broken. She looked at Alaric, not at Nessa, at Alaric. The look was brief and direct, and loaded with 1,200 years of history and ambition, and the specific fury of a woman who had been passed over for something she could not understand. "To preserving what matters," she said, "even as the world changes around us." She drank. The room drank. The toast was technically gracious, and actually a blade, and everyone in the room knew the difference, and no one was going to say so, because saying so would be admitting that they had heard the blade, and admitting you heard it was admitting you were cut by it. Nessa stood. She did not plan it. She did not calculate it. She did not run the strategic implications through the filter of political consequences and factional responses. She stood because she was tired of sitting and watching people say things that meant other things, and pretend the other things were not there. She picked up her glass. She was the only person in the room holding a glass of water, because she did not drink the alternative, and she did not pretend to. The room looked at her. 112 vampires looked at a 28-year-old veterinary technician from Lewisham, holding a glass of water in a black dress, at a 1,000-year-old table in a cliff-top cathedral in Scotland. She raised the glass. "To Dorian and Alara," she said. "Who chose each other anyway?" 7 words. She sat down. The room was very still. The stillness lasted exactly 4 seconds, which in vampire time was an eternity, and in human time was just long enough for the words to reach every ear, and settle into every mind, and do their work. Edmund Hale raised his glass. "To choosing," he said. The Morell family, who appreciated audacity, raised their glasses. One by one, the tables joined. Not all of them. Not the Ashworths. Not Serafina, who stood in the center of the room holding her glass and her smile and watching the tide turn against her with the specific, private fury of someone who has lost a battle they did not expect to fight. But enough. Enough glasses. Enough voices. Enough. Nessa sat in her chair and drank her water, and her hand, the hand that was not holding the glass, was trembling under the table where no one could see it, except Alaric, who reached over without looking and placed his cold hand over her warm one and held it. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. But their hands stayed. The reception continued. Music played, ancient music, arrangements that predated everything Nessa knew about music and that sounded like the earth remembering something. Dorian and Alara danced, and the Fey bride's light spun around them in a spiral that painted the walls with gold. Serafina did not approach Nessa again. She stayed at her table, surrounded by the Ashworth family, and she drank from her glass, and she watched, and she calculated, and she filed the evening under a category that Nessa would never know about, but that roughly translated to unfinished. Lena appeared beside Nessa's chair at one point, bending down with the professional discretion of a woman who has been bending down to whisper things at formal events for 8 centuries. "Well done," she said. "I said 7 words. The right 7 words. At the right moment, to the right room. I did not plan it. I know. That is why it worked." Lena straightened and disappeared back into the crowd, which was her natural habitat, the space between people, the margin where the real work happened. The evening wound down. The guests dispersed in groups, departing in their convoys and their finery, carrying with them the complicated gift of a wedding that had changed things. Not resolved things, changed them. The distinction mattered. Resolution was an ending. Change was a beginning. Nessa found Alaric on the cathedral steps after the last guests had left. He was standing in the wind, looking at the sea. The water was black and silver, reflecting a moon that had appeared through the clouds like a late guest who had not wanted to miss the end. She stood beside him. The wind pulled at her dress. The cold bit at her skin. She was mortal and warm, and the wind was immortal and cold, and neither of them was going to yield. Alaric. Nessa. It is done. The wedding. The wedding. The toast. The part where I stood up in front of 100 vampires and said 7 words and my hand shook. Your hand shook. Do not pretend you did not notice. You held it. He looked at her. The moonlight made his face different. Softer, somehow. Less carved, more human. The face of a man instead of a monument. I held it because it was shaking, and because I wanted to. You are getting better at that. At what? At saying what you want. The wind came off the sea. It carried salt and distance, and the sound of waves hitting the base of the cliff. A patient, rhythmic sound. The sound of something that has been doing the same thing for millennia, and will continue doing it for millennia more. Come inside, Nessa said. You have been standing in wind for long enough. I do not feel cold. I know, but I do, and I am not going inside without you, because that would defeat the purpose of me standing out here in the first place. He looked at her. She looked at him. They went inside. The cathedral was empty now. The candles had been dimmed. The flowers still climbed the columns. The tables still held the remnants of a celebration that had changed the shape of vampire society, one toast at a time. They walked the stone corridors together, their footsteps overlapping, hers quick and light, his slow and measured, and the rhythm of it was imperfect and unrehearsed, and completely, wonderfully human. At the door to her chambers, they stopped. I am going home tomorrow, Nessa said. He was still. Not because I want to leave, because I have animals at the clinic that need me, and rent that is due, and a life that exists outside of this cathedral. And that life is important to me, even though it is small and ordinary, and does not involve Gothic architecture, or vintage cars or ravens that fake injuries. I understand. I need you to understand something else. What? I am not leaving you. I am going home. There is a difference. Leaving is permanent. Going home is geography. He was quiet for a long time. The corridor was dark around them. The stone held the silence the way stone holds everything, with patience and without judgment. I have not distinguished between the two in a long time, he said. I know, that is the Prague thing. The Prague thing. The thing you do not talk about. The thing that made you brick up the windows and stop being a person. The thing that made going and leaving the same word in your vocabulary. You are very observant. I am a vet tech. I observe things for a living. Sick animals do not tell you what is wrong. You have to watch. You have to pay attention to the things they do not say. You are basically a very large, very old, very stubborn animal that will not tell me what is wrong. That is the least romantic comparison I have ever received. I am not trying to be romantic. I am trying to be honest. Romance is your brother's department. He does the grand gestures and the beautiful speeches. I do the part where I look you in the eye and tell you that I am going home and I am coming back, and those two things are not in conflict. You are coming back. If you want me to. I want you to. 3 words. I want you to. Simple, unstrategic, true. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand was warm. His skin was cold. The contrast had stopped being strange and had become something else. Something that felt like a vocabulary they were building together. Word by cold, warm word. Then I will come back. She went inside. She closed the door. He stood in the corridor for 11 minutes. This time he counted them himself. The next morning, Nessa packed her bag. She put General Whiskers in his carrier. She loaded Biscuit and Professor Tiny into the car. She stood in the entrance hall of the Voss estate, surrounded by stone columns and ancient history, and the faint echo of a building that had once been used to worship something larger than the people inside it. Lena was there. Colton was there. Alaric was there. She thanked Lena. Lena received the thanks with a nod that contained, somewhere in its precise geometry, the equivalent of a hug. She thanked Colton. Colton said, It has been genuinely interesting, and meant it. She looked at Alaric. Thank you, she said, for the most insane, beautiful, terrifying week of my life. You are welcome. I need to go home and water my plant, and feed my cat, and exist in a world where people do not turn to ash. I understand. I will call you. I do not have a phone. You are going to get a phone. He looked at Lena. Lena looked at him. I will acquire a phone, he said. Today. Today. She got in the car. The door closed. The engine started. Alaric stood in the driveway of his cathedral and watched the car pull away. It moved down the long gravel drive, past the formal gardens, through the iron gates, and onto the road that led to the motorway, that led to London, that led to a studio apartment above a laundromat, where a dead succulent sat on a kitchen counter, waiting to be watered. He stood there, 11 minutes. Lena found him. Shall I have the suite cleared? Leave it. She nodded. She had already decided not to clear it, but it mattered that he said it. 3 days later. Nessa opened the clinic at 6 in the morning. The dawn was gray and cold, and smelled like London, which is to say it smelled like exhaust and ambition, and the specific optimism of a city that has been alive for 2,000 years, and is still convinced that today might be different. She unlocked the front door, she turned on the lights, she walked to the reception desk and set down her bag and took off her coat and looked at the counter. A raven was sitting on it. Edgar, perfectly healthy. Black feathers immaculate. One eye fixed on her with the focused intelligence of a creature that has traveled 200 miles to sit on a reception desk and wait. Beside him was a note. The handwriting was old-fashioned, careful, the kind of handwriting that belongs in a museum or on a document that decides the fate of nations. Each letter was formed with the precision of someone who learned to write when writing was an art and had never adjusted to the modern idea that speed matters more than form. He insists he is injured. I suspect he simply likes you. That makes 2 of us. Nessa read the note. She read it again. She looked at Edgar. Edgar looked at her. He ruffled his feathers in a way that was both dignified and somehow hopeful, the way a very old, very proud creature ruffles its feathers when it has been sent on an errand of the heart and wants to do the job well. She put the note in the pocket of her scrubs, the pocket with the hedgehogs on it. She examined the bird. He was, as always, in perfect health. She told him so. He accepted the diagnosis, with a nod that was almost human, and completely Edgar. She did not call Alaric. She did not text the number she had been given, the number attached to a phone that she was fairly certain had been purchased that morning by a steward who had opinions about smartphones. She kept the note. She treated the bird. She gave him water and a piece of the chicken sandwich she had brought for lunch, which he ate with the delicate fastidiousness of a creature that has dined in the courts of kings and finds mortal food acceptable but not exceptional. She went about her day. She treated animals. She cleaned kennels. She administered medications. She did the work she had always done, the small, necessary, unglamorous work of keeping living things alive, and the work felt the same, and also completely different, because she was the same person, and also a completely different person, and that is what happens when you go to a vampire wedding, and stand up in front of 100 immortals, and say 7 words, and mean all of them. At the end of her shift, she drove home. She parked on the street. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. She unlocked the door. She set General Whiskers free from his carrier and watched him make a direct line for the sink, where he curled up with the satisfied finality of a creature that has been to a Gothic cathedral and has decided that sinks are still better. She went to the kitchen counter. She watered the succulent. She looked at it, brown and dry and thoroughly, comprehensively departed from the world of living things. 7 months dead. 7 months of water and hope, and the stubborn, irrational refusal to accept that some things do not come back. She watered it anyway. Because some things are not about the plant. Some things are about the watering, about the act of showing up, day after day, for something that the world has written off, about the belief, irrational and beautiful and fundamentally human, that care matters, even when the outcome is uncertain. She put down the watering can. She took the note out of her pocket. She read it one more time. He insists he is injured. I suspect he simply likes you. That makes 2 of us. She put the note on the counter next to the succulent, next to the broken toaster, next to the pile of mail she had not opened. She looked at it sitting there among the ordinary things of her ordinary life, this small piece of extraordinary, this handwritten bridge between a world of ancient stone and immortal power, and a studio apartment above a laundromat. She did not call him, but she kept the note. And in a cathedral 200 miles away, a man who had not felt anything in 600 years stood at a window he had unbricked that morning, the first window he had unbricked in centuries, and he looked out at the English countryside, and he let the light in. It was not much. One window, one small rectangle of daylight in a building full of darkness. But it was a start. And starts, Nessa would have told him, if she had been there, are just another word for watering dead things and waiting to see what grows.